Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I've never paid much attention to sounds in a building before. Doors slam, pipes rattle, neighbors cough. It's all just background noise to me. But this place is different. I noticed it on my first day here during my move. I dragged a heavy box across the hall and I heard a faint scraping sound behind me. I thought it was another tenant, maybe someone helping with their own boxes. I turned around and saw no one. The hallway was empty, painted in faded beige with a single dull light overhead. I shrugged it off and kept dragging my box. That's when I heard that same scraping sound again. About a second after I stopped moving the box. It wasn't in sync with me. It was delayed. I shrugged again, trying to ignore it. I was tired and sore from lifting all my stuff into the apartment. The floor creaked under my feet, and each creak seemed to bounce back at me a moment later, like an echo that had been slowed down. It felt odd, but I was too busy to dwell on it. I carried on, setting up my new place, unpacking my clothes, and trying to make sense of the clutter. The building had an old smell, a mix of wood, dust, and stale air. The walls were thick, and the floors were probably from the early 1900s, covered in worn-out hardwood boards that squeaked with every step. In the first week, I barely left my apartment. I was dealing with new job stress and a pile of unpacked boxes. The corridor outside my door was always dim, and I only heard footsteps a few times. Those footsteps never sounded normal. They echoed in a funny way, always off by a beat, as if the hallway itself was repeating them. The landlord had warned me the place was old and had some quirks, but he never mentioned delayed echoes. One evening, I decided to test it. I stood in the hallway and stomped my foot. It was a firm stomp meant to make a clear sound. I waited. The echo came about a second later, but it was softer and almost breathy. It reminded me of someone trying to mimic the sound with their mouth. I didn't like it. It made the skin on the back of my neck prickle. I glanced at the walls. The paint was chipping in some spots, and I saw a few cracks near the ceiling. The dim light made everything look washed out. I stood there, tense, wondering if I was imagining things. I stomped again. The same delayed echo came back, except it didn't sound exactly like my stomp. It was a little off-pitch, like a hushed voice trying to copy me. I felt my chest tighten, my heart thudded. I told myself it had to be some acoustic quirk of the hallway. Maybe the shape of the corridor created weird echoes. I went back inside, closed my door, and tried not to think about it. That night, though, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I shifted in bed, I thought I heard a faint creaking out in the hallway, trailing my movements. Maybe it was just my imagination. The next morning I left for work, and I heard my own footsteps echo behind me. That's normal in an old building, but the gap was off. Instead of overlapping with my steps, I heard the tail end of each step a moment later. It unnerved me enough that I quickened my pace. When I reached the elevator, I stood still for a moment and tapped my foot once more. After I stopped tapping, I heard a gentle tap, almost like a single clap, but stretched out. I stared at the walls. They were covered in ancient wallpaper, yellowed with age. I felt hot and uncomfortable, like I was being watched. The elevator arrived. I got in, and the doors closed, cutting off the hallway with a hiss. For a while, I tried to ignore it. Work kept me busy, and I didn't notice anything strange there. The problem was the building, not me. But every night I'd come home, walk down that corridor, and hear the same second-late echo behind me. Sometimes it felt distant. Other times it felt close, as if something was right behind my shoulder. I started to get jumpy. I'd turn around fast, hoping to catch someone messing with me, but there was never anyone there. About 2 weeks in, I tried an experiment in my living room. I closed all the windows and turned off every appliance to make the place as quiet as possible. I stood in the center of the room. I clapped my hands 3 times. I listened carefully. The first clap echoed normally, bouncing off the walls. The second clap did the same, but the third clap produced an echo that sounded like a muffled whisper. I can't describe it any other way. It wasn't just a reflection of the sound, it was more like a person whispering, "shh," in another room. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I stared at the walls and the ceiling. My throat felt dry. I tried again. Clap, clap, clap. The first two were normal. The third again sounded distorted. It was as though the building was trying to repeat me but didn't remember how to do it properly. My chest tightened again and I felt sweat gathering at my temples. I decided I'd done enough clapping for one night, so I turned on the TV to drown out the silence. At night, I started hearing odd murmurs in the hallway. It wasn't loud, but I could tell it was more than just the creaks of old pipes. I'd listen at my door, pressing my ear against the wood. I heard something that resembled speech, but it wasn't a language I recognized. I heard syllables separated by short pauses, almost like chanting. My stomach knotted up. I thought about calling the landlord, but what would I say? That the hallways echoed weirdly and sometimes sounded like they were talking? I kept quiet and tried to convince myself it was old ventilation ducts or water running through old pipes. One night I decided I'd gather real proof. I'm not great with tech, but I grabbed my phone, opened a voice recording app, and placed it right outside my apartment door. Then I walked back inside, left the door open a crack, and waited silently in the dark. The building was quiet, apart from the low hum of my refrigerator. My heart pounded. I heard a shuffle or a scratch every now and then, but I couldn't place the source. After about 10 minutes, I got up and grabbed my phone. I locked the door, turned on a small lamp, and listened to the recording. At first, it was just normal building sounds, soft hums, maybe a slight breeze from somewhere. Then I heard something that sounded like a breath. It was followed by a faint tapping in a slow rhythm. After a moment, I heard what I can only describe as a weak imitation of my voice. I don't recall saying anything, but I heard something that sounded like my own tone, except the words were garbled. I felt my mouth go dry. I replayed that part 5 or 6 times. Each time I got more anxious. I could pick out a few syllables. Ah. It didn't match any language I know. It sounded like a messed up replay of something I might have said earlier, but twisted. My hands shook as I held the phone. I deleted the file because I didn't want to hear it again. I almost regretted not keeping it, but I felt sick to my stomach. After that, I started seeing changes in my own behavior. I would leave the apartment less often. I started ordering takeout instead of going to the store. I even put rugs down all over the hardwood floors, hoping they would dampen my footsteps and avoid that echo. But the rugs didn't fix anything. I still heard the late echo behind me whenever I moved around. In the hallway, it was worse. The corridor carried my footsteps in that weird, delayed pattern, sometimes sounding half a second behind me, sometimes a full second. I noticed the difference by counting in my head. Step 1001. Echo. It never matched up. It started giving me headaches. I tried talking to one of my neighbors, a middle-aged guy who lived on the other side of the floor. I knocked on his door, and he opened it a crack. I saw his eye peering through the gap. I asked if he ever noticed strange echoes in the hallway. He looked at me with a blank stare. He said the building had old plumbing and old walls, and that he'd heard plenty of creaks and groans, but nothing out of the ordinary. Then he said he had to get back to something and close the door. His reaction was cold, like he didn't want to talk about it. I stood there in the hallway for a moment, feeling uneasy. I noticed my pulse hammering in my ears. I went back to my apartment, locked the door, and put on music to try to cover up the tension. Several nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. My room was dark, and my ears were ringing with silence. I realized I was holding my breath. Then I heard a light tapping from somewhere above me. It was like someone tapping a pencil on the ceiling. I listened, and the tapping sounded rhythmic. I held my breath, hoping it would stop. It did, but then I heard what sounded like my own voice. I froze. It was muffled, but I could tell it had the same pitch and tone as mine. It repeated a simple sequence of sounds. I couldn't make them out clearly, but it was close enough to how I talk that it made my scalp prickle. The voice trailed off, fading into a soft hiss. My body tensed up, my arms felt cold, and my head started throbbing. I wanted to shout at the walls to leave me alone, but I was too scared that it would reply. I didn't want to encourage whatever was imitating me. I lay in bed, breathing carefully, staring at the dark ceiling until dawn. When morning came, I got up, showered, and made coffee without thinking straight. My mind was racing. I had nowhere else to go. I was locked into a lease, and I didn't have the money to move again. That day, I spent most of my time out of the apartment. I sat in a coffee shop, nursing the same cup for hours, trying not to go back. I only returned when it was almost midnight, figuring I'd just crash and hope for some sleep. But as soon as I stepped into the building, I felt the weight of that echo again. The lobby was eerily quiet, lit by a single fluorescent tube that flickered every now and then. I walked down the corridor to the elevator, counting my steps. I heard them repeated a second later. My mouth felt dry, and my fingers tightened around my keys. I forced myself to ride up to my floor. When the doors opened, the hallway was completely dark. The light fixture outside my apartment was out. I had to use the flashlight on my phone to see my door. I stepped out of the elevator, and as I did, I heard my own footsteps a beat behind me. I whipped around, shining the light everywhere. Nothing, just worn walls and peeling paint. I walked to my door as fast as I could. My heart pounded. The echo of my steps came after I had already stopped. It felt like something was following me, copying me in slow motion. I jammed my key into the lock, turned it, and rushed inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I stood in the dark, listening. For a second, there was silence. Then I heard a faint, breathy step on the other side of the door, like the building itself was catching up. My forehead was damp with sweat. I flipped the light switch and leaned against the wall. My stomach churned, and I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down. That night, the building felt alive. Every board in the floor seemed to groan and pop. The pipes hissed whenever I ran the faucet, but behind those normal old building sounds, I still heard that delayed echo. I took off my shoes and socks, thinking barefoot steps would be quieter. But even then, the floor squeaked softly, and I heard a squeak follow a moment later. My arms shook as I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was almost 1 a.m. My eyes stung from exhaustion. I climbed into bed, not bothering to change. I just wanted to sleep, to escape for a while. I turned off the light and lay there staring at the ceiling. I tried not to breathe too loudly, afraid the building would repeat my breaths. After a few minutes, I heard the same set of syllables I'd picked up in the recording. They were hushed, but I recognized the pattern. Or something along those lines. It sounded like it was coming from the walls themselves, maybe from the hallway or the next apartment. I felt my pulse racing. My entire body was tense. The urge to scream or pound on the walls was almost overpowering, but I stayed quiet, keeping my breathing steady. The whispered syllables continued for a minute, then faded away. The building settled into its usual night sounds, creaks, distant hums, random cracks in the wood. I waited, forcing my body to relax bit by bit. My eyelids got heavy and I eventually drifted off, though it felt like I was only half asleep. When I woke up the next morning, everything was quiet again. The echo wasn't so noticeable during the day, especially with traffic noise outside and neighbors going about their routines. But I couldn't forget what happened at night. I kept telling myself I might be imagining it, that stress was playing tricks on my mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something in this building was storing my sounds, replaying them, and maybe trying to imitate me. Whenever I was alone and it was quiet, I sensed that presence lingering just behind each movement I made. I don't know how long I'll stay here. My lease isn't up for months, and I'm not sure how to explain the situation to anyone. I don't have actual proof, especially since I deleted that recording. But I know what I've heard. This isn't just a normal echo from old walls. It feels personal, like the building has a voice of its own, and it's using my sounds to speak. It's out of sync, twisted and off balance, but it's trying. And late at night when the halls are dark, it's right there, repeating every step I take, a second too late, as if it's planning to take my place once it figures out how to get it right. I remember the exact moment I saw the first red spots on my wall. I was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, staring at the fresh coat of paint. I had chosen a light color because I thought it would brighten the place. My brush strokes had been smooth, and I made sure to let everything dry overnight. The next morning I walked in and froze. Tiny red stains dotted the surface near the corner of the room. They were about the size of pinheads, scattered in small clusters. I leaned in close to get a better look. The spots didn't have any texture. They looked flat, almost blended into the paint. I touched one with my fingertip. It didn't smear or feel damp. I was confused, but not alarmed. I assumed it was a defect in the paint or maybe some problem with the primer. I decided I'd fix it after work that day. I shrugged and left for my job. That night I returned with a small brush and the leftover paint. I flipped on the overhead light and expected to see the same faint dots. Instead, I saw more of them. They had spread, forming thin lines that ran a few inches in random directions. I didn't like that. My first instinct was to check the can of paint in case it was contaminated. I took the can outside under a bright lamp. I stirred it. It looked normal. I didn't see any red pigment floating around. I felt a slight unease, but I convinced myself it was some weird chemical reaction with the wall. I went back inside, closed the door, and turned on a smaller lamp so I could work on the spots without straining my eyes. I applied a fresh coat of paint in that corner. I made sure to use multiple strokes and covered the entire area around the stains. Then I waited for it to dry while I watched TV in the living room. My mind drifted to other things, but I still wondered if I had messed up with the primer. After a couple of hours, I went back to check. I pressed my palm on the surface. It felt dry. I turned on the light. The spots were gone. I felt a bit of relief, so I cleaned up and went to bed. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to get a glass of water. I passed by the bedroom door on my way to the kitchen and noticed a faint glow through the narrow gap at the base of the door. I pushed the door open. A strange red shimmer flickered along the wall where I had painted. It was dull, not enough to light up the entire room, but enough to catch my eye in the darkness. I took a step inside. The lines had returned. They were thin and branched out in random patterns. They seemed to move with the shifting shadows. I stayed there for a few seconds, staring at them. I reached for the light switch and turned it on. The glow disappeared under the bright light, but the red lines stayed. They looked more vibrant now, as if they had pushed through the second layer of paint. My stomach felt tight. My heart pounded in my chest. I looked around for anything that could have caused it, but I saw no leaks or cracks. I touched the wall again. It felt cool and dry. The lines didn't flake off or bleed. They were just there. I barely slept that night. I sat in the living room, flipping channels and trying to distract myself. In the morning, I contacted the hardware store. I asked if they had ever heard of red stains appearing after painting. The employee on the phone had no idea what I was talking about. They suggested it might be mold or rust seeping from old pipes inside the wall. I mentioned that the lines glowed. They paused, then laughed a bit. They said they had never heard of anything like that. I hung up feeling embarrassed and frustrated. I decided to repaint the entire room. I drove back to the store, bought a different brand of primer and paint, and spent most of my Saturday prepping the walls. I sanded them lightly. I wiped them down with a cloth until the surfaces were clean. I applied the primer carefully. While it dried, I took a break, ate a simple meal, and drank some water. I kept checking the walls, waiting for something to appear. For a while, there was nothing. The new primer looked fine. The smell of fresh paint filled the air. That evening, I rolled on the new paint. It was a more expensive brand, and I hoped it would seal whatever was bleeding through. I worked until late. By the end of the night, the bedroom looked smooth and clean. I felt a little surge of pride as I stood there. I opened the window to air out the paint smell and left the room to let it dry overnight. Around midnight, I lay in bed. Not in the bedroom, but on the couch. I didn't want to sleep in that room yet. The house was quiet. The new paint smell lingered in the air. My eyes felt heavy, but my body was tense. Eventually, I drifted off. A few hours later, I dreamed that the walls were closing in on me. I felt them pressing against my shoulders. I smelled paint fumes. My chest was heavy and I felt trapped. Suddenly, I woke up breathing hard. I noticed sweat on my forehead. My hands felt cold. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, then forced myself to sit up. I crept down the hallway and listened near the door to the bedroom. I heard nothing. I turned the knob and took a breath before stepping inside. At first, I only saw darkness. Then I realized the lines were back. They covered more area than before. They reached across the wall in intricate patterns. Some of them zigzagged halfway to the ceiling. They looked bolder than before. My pulse hammered and I felt a tightness in my throat. I didn't see any cracks in the paint, but the lines were visible. I tried to stay calm. I opened the window to let in some moonlight. A faint red glow traced along certain sections of the lines. I felt a wave of nerves in my stomach. I hurried over to my toolbox and grabbed a paint scraper. I wanted to see if the red color was on the surface or if it had soaked into the wall. I pressed the blade against a small section and scraped lightly. The paint chipped off in flakes, revealing a layer of primer underneath. The red lines seemed to be embedded in the primer as well. I pushed harder, scraping down until I saw the older layer of paint from before I started. The lines were there too. I stood up, feeling tense and confused. I knew that it made no sense for anything to stain multiple layers unless something inside the wall was forcing its way through. I decided to leave the room and close the door behind me. I felt uneasy staying in there. Every time I blinked, I could still see the red patterns in my mind. I grabbed a bottle of water from the kitchen and paced around the living room. I considered contacting a professional painter or a contractor, but I didn't have a lot of money. I also felt uneasy about explaining the glowing effect. It didn't sound believable. I didn't know if they would think I was making it up or if they would charge me a fortune to tear the whole wall apart. Over the next few days, things got worse. My sleep suffered. Every time I lay down, I felt this sense of pressure on my chest. I kept dreaming about the walls moving closer to me. I woke up several times drenched in sweat. My arms felt shaky when I thought about going into the bedroom. I tried ignoring it, hoping the red marks would fade on their own, but they never did. They grew in thickness. They stretched across different sections of the room. When I stood in there with the lights off, I saw that glow again. It was dull but constant. My pulse would spike and I'd feel a tremor in my hands. I could sense that the room felt heavy. The air was still and thick. One evening, I tried using a strong bleach solution. I opened the window for ventilation, put on gloves, and scrubbed one patch of the wall. The bleach ran in thin streams down the paint, but the red stain stayed put. I wiped it with a cloth, but all I saw was a smear of water and bleach. The red color didn't budge. I felt my eyes burn from the fumes, so I tossed the rag in the sink. I wiped my forehead and noticed how tense my shoulders felt. A few nights later, I heard a faint noise coming from the bedroom. It was a clicking or tapping sound. I got up from the couch and walked carefully to the door. I turned the knob slowly and opened it an inch. The red glow illuminated the walls. I stepped inside and saw the lines pulsating. The faint sound continued for a few seconds and then stopped. I stood there, heart pounding. My hands felt clammy and my knees felt weak. I switched on the overhead light. The glow vanished, but the lines remained. I tapped the wall with my knuckles and listened. It sounded solid. I let out a shaky breath and left the room again. My nightmares got more frequent. In them, the red color dripped from the walls and touched my skin. My chest felt tight, and I thought I would pass out in my sleep. Every morning I woke up with my legs shaky and my mouth felt dry. I got headaches that lasted for hours. I couldn't concentrate at work. I came home every evening and spent my time staring at the closed bedroom door or pacing around the living room. I decided to do one more repaint job, just to see if maybe I could seal everything with a thick coat of high-quality sealant. I went all out. I bought a heavy-duty sealer, a new roller, and the best paint I could find. I spent an entire Saturday on it again. I covered every inch of the walls. I did the ceiling too, and I even painted the trim. I let it all dry with the windows open. I watched the walls carefully. For the first few hours, I didn't see any spots. That evening, I felt a slight hope. My body relaxed a bit, and I managed to watch a movie without thinking about the stains. Around midnight, I decided to check one last time before trying to sleep in the room. I grabbed a flashlight. The house was silent. I pushed the door open and shone the light across the walls. At first, I didn't see anything, but then my beam caught the outlines. The red lines had come back again, right through the new paint. They were bright and ran across the surface in chaotic patterns. My chest tightened and my breathing got shallow. I set the flashlight on the dresser and flicked the overhead light on. The lines stayed visible. They looked stronger than ever. I felt a jolt of panic. My feet felt rooted to the spot. My eyes locked on the red lines. They seemed to shift in front of me. I forced myself to step forward and press my palm against one of the thicker lines near the corner. It felt warm. I snatched my hand back. My breath caught in my throat. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the wall. I grabbed the flashlight off the dresser, turned off the light, and rushed out of the room. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. I slammed the door and leaned against it, breathing fast. My shirt clung to my back. I felt my heart racing in my ears. I decided I couldn't keep sleeping in that house the way things were going. I locked the bedroom door and put tape around the frame. I didn't know what else to do. I slept on the couch again, but it wasn't restful. I had the same claustrophobic dream, and I woke up gasping for air. My body ached. I spent the next day feeling exhausted. My limbs felt weak and my head throbbed. I opened that door a few times just to check, and the lines were always there, glowing faintly in the dim light. I got to a point where I didn't want to be in the house at all. I went for long drives after work. I ate fast food in my car just to avoid coming home. Whenever I stepped through the front door, I felt a heaviness. My hands shook if I even glanced at the bedroom door. I heard faint ticking sounds at night, and I felt uneasy all the time. My appetite dropped. I forced myself to drink water and eat something, but I felt nauseous. After a few weeks of this, I realized I needed help. I contacted a general contractor, left a brief message about persistent staining, and asked if they could inspect the walls. I didn't mention anything about the glow or the pulsing. I was too afraid they wouldn't believe me. I just said there was some kind of seepage. I'm waiting for their call back now. I'm telling this story while sitting on my couch. My eyes keep darting to the hallway. The bedroom door is still taped shut. My breathing feels short, and my legs are jittery. It's hard to relax. I can't keep avoiding it, but every time I think about the red marks and how they push through layer after layer of paint, I feel a tight knot in my stomach. I don't know what's going on behind that door right now. The lines might be spreading even more. They might be covering the ceiling or branching onto the floor. I don't want to think about it. I'm just waiting for a professional to come and tear that wall apart, or do something else that will fix this. I haven't slept more than 3 or 4 hours a night. My eyelids feel heavy and my eyes burn. My neck feels stiff. I keep imagining that the house is pressing in on me. Sometimes I stand outside in my yard and stare at the window to that bedroom. I see faint flickers of red through the curtains at night. My chest gets tight. My arms feel weak. I can't believe how quickly this situation escalated. I've never felt this powerless in my own home. Right now, I'm just sitting here telling you everything, hoping to calm myself down. I hear a soft noise behind the hallway wall. It's a steady tapping. It stops for a few seconds, then starts again. My heart is beating hard. I'm sweating a little. I keep wiping my palms on my jeans. I feel trapped. I can't go in there, and I can't pretend it's not happening. I'm stuck waiting. I don't smell anything. There's no odor, no gas leak, no moldy stench. There's only that persistent feeling of heaviness. I feel it when I breathe. I feel it in my gut. It's a nagging sensation that won't leave me alone. My mind races with questions, but I have no real answers. I don't know if the contractors will find something physical in the walls or if they'll just stare at me confused. I have no idea how long I can keep living like this. All I know is that every time I tried to hide those red marks, they fought back. They appeared stronger and brighter. They spread across the surface, glowing with a dull light in the night. I see them in my dreams. I feel them in my chest when I lie down. I don't feel safe in that room. I don't feel safe in my own home right now. And that's the worst part. I'm tense, I'm restless, and I'm waiting for any kind of solution. Until then, I'm just here, hoping the walls don't close in on me again tonight. I moved into this house 6 months ago. I wanted a place with a decent-sized yard, and this one seemed perfect from the start. The grass was overgrown and the back fence needed mending, but it felt manageable. The realtor mentioned an old well sealed shut decades ago. I didn't think much of it until a couple of weeks ago when I decided to start some landscaping. I didn't expect that removing a heavy iron lid would lead to these nights of sweating and hearing strange dripping sounds in every corner of the house. I remember that day clearly. I had on a pair of work gloves and a plain gray t-shirt. The sun was hot, and the smell of damp earth hung around the yard. I took a shovel to clear away some vines that had grown over the well's surface. Underneath those vines, I saw rust spots and a chain looped through an iron ring on the lid. It was thick metal, heavier than I expected. I had to pry it with a crowbar to get some leverage. When the lid finally shifted, it made a scraping sound that sent a chill over my arms. It took me a few minutes to push the lid aside, and by the time I did, I was already sweating through my shirt. Inside the well, the bricks looked wet, though there was no obvious moisture on the ground around it. I leaned forward, my head over the gap, and caught a whiff of stale air. It made me cough. I reached for the flashlight I'd brought. When I shone the light along the inside, something glimmered in a gap between two bricks, near the top edge. I bent down a bit more, resting one hand on the rim. My glove brushed against something small and hard. I set the flashlight on the ground and used my other hand to pry it loose. That's when I realized it was a ring. The ring had a thick band of some metal I couldn't identify. It might have been silver or iron, hard to tell with the dirt on it. In the center sat a dark crystal or stone. It felt cold in my hand, colder than the metal edges. It was stuck at first, but it came free with a rough jerk, and I almost lost my balance, kneeling against the side of the well. The moment I held it, the ring gave me an uneasy sensation, like the skin on the back of my neck was prickling. I slipped it into my pocket without a second thought. I didn't see any reason to drop it back in, and I felt a weird curiosity about it. I replaced the iron lid, patted it in place, and spent the rest of the afternoon cutting back weeds. Later that evening, I took a shower. I heard something in the pipes at first, dripping that didn't match the water flow in my shower. I turned the knob to shut the water off. My shower head stopped spraying, but I kept hearing a faint drip, drip, drip. I went back to the sink in the bathroom, twisted the faucet to see if it was leaking, but it was dry. The drip, drip, drip continued somewhere behind the walls. I tapped the tiles, thinking maybe there was a leak inside, but then it faded. I shrugged it off. Old houses make weird sounds all the time. That night I got into bed, too tired to think about anything but sleep. As soon as I closed my eyes, I felt this wave of unease. I couldn't figure out why. Maybe it was just the excitement of the day, I thought. But after I dozed off, I had a dream. I dreamed I was falling into the well, the same one I'd opened hours earlier. The bricks flew past me, and cold air whipped against my face. At the bottom, I saw something dark and motionless. A voice called out from below, a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. "Give it back," it said. I jolted awake, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. My bedroom was pitch black, and I heard that same dripping noise. It sounded louder, like it was right next to my bed. I flicked on the lamp, looked around, saw nothing. I lay back down, but sleep didn't come easily after that. The next day, I tried to distract myself by continuing my work in the yard. I hammered new boards into the fence, trimmed bushes, and spent a couple of hours raking leaves. Each time I paused, I caught the faint sound of water dripping. It came from no clear direction. It seemed to shift from side to side, sometimes near the shed, sometimes near the kitchen window. I told myself it was in my head. I kept thinking maybe the ring was cursed or something ridiculous like that, but I tried to ignore the thought. By late afternoon, I was exhausted. I wanted a cold drink, so I went inside and opened the fridge for a soda. The moment I twisted the bottle cap, I heard a soft hiss and then that drip, drip, drip. It felt like a warning. My stomach clenched. I quickly finished my drink and set the bottle on the counter. I didn't enjoy the taste. I kept expecting to see water leaking somewhere, but everything was dry. That night, I went to bed early. I hoped that a good rest would clear my head. I woke up in the middle of the night, startled by a dream where I was again inside the well, sinking deeper, no bottom in sight. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The voice returned, echoing in the darkness, telling me to return the ring. My chest felt tight. I was shaking when I opened my eyes. I glanced at the clock. It was 3 a.m. My throat felt parched, so I went to the kitchen. The hallway was dark and every step felt loud on the wood floors. I flicked on the kitchen light and approached the sink. As soon as I turned on the faucet, I had the sensation of someone watching from behind. I spun around, but no one was there. The hair on my arms was standing up. My heart thudded in my chest. The faucet hissed and spurted a bit of water. I filled a glass and drank fast. The water felt thick in my throat. When I finished, I wiped my mouth and shut off the faucet. The dripping started again, louder than ever, but it sounded like it was right under the sink. I opened the cabinet door, but there was no leak. Nothing was wet. The drip, drip, drip continued for a few seconds, then stopped as if it never existed. In the following days, the dripping noise followed me everywhere. I heard it in the living room while I watched TV. I heard it when I stepped into the garage to get some tools. I even heard it when I went to check my mailbox at the end of the driveway. It was never overwhelming, just soft, steady, and out of place. I tried to act normal. I still went to work, did my job, and met a friend for coffee once. But each time I took a sip of any liquid, I felt uneasy. I started avoiding water whenever possible. I skipped washing my hands if they weren't too dirty. I used paper towels to wipe sweat off my face instead of splashing water in the sink. My skin felt sticky most of the time, but I preferred that to feeling spied on. The ring stayed in a small box in my nightstand. I tried to forget it was there, but every time I opened that drawer to grab something else, the ring caught my eye. I touched it a couple of times, thinking maybe I should throw it away or bury it somewhere. The crystal in the center felt cold, even though my house was warm. I felt a slight vibration in my hand whenever I picked it up. It made me queasy. A few times, I heard that deep voice in my head, repeating the same phrase, "Give it back." It made me sweat. My mind raced with all sorts of ideas, but I tried to keep it together by focusing on things I could control, like fixing the fence or patching holes in the drywall. One evening, I forced myself to check the well again. I waited until just before sunset, hoping the light would give me some sense of security. I pulled back the vines that had already begun to creep over the lid again. The lid was as heavy as before. I managed to slide it aside, the metal scraping against the stone. I knelt down and peered into the well with a flashlight. The bricks were still damp. I felt a rush of cold air blow up at me, though there was no breeze outside. I shone the light down and saw only darkness. The beam didn't reveal water at the bottom. My pulse raced and I felt short of breath. I stayed like that for a minute, crouched, listening for anything. I heard a faint dripping sound echoing up the shaft. My mouth felt dry, and my hands were clammy. I gripped the flashlight tighter. Then I heard that low voice, not in my head, but reverberating from inside the well. It said nothing specific this time. It was just a long, low moan. I dropped the flashlight in surprise, and it clattered against the bricks. Its light flickered, shining into the dark. I scrabbled back, my heart pounding like it was trying to break out of my chest. I kicked the iron lid back into place, scraping my knuckles on the concrete. I didn't care about the flashlight. I didn't want to reach in again. That night I sat on my couch with all the lights on. I felt nauseous. The dripping noise seemed to creep through the walls. I thought about returning the ring. I had no idea how to do it properly. Should I toss it into the well and seal it again? Would that fix anything? The voice in my dreams said I had to return the ring, but it never explained how. Part of me worried that putting it back in the well might make things worse. I pictured something reaching up to grab my arm if I tried. I wiped sweat from my forehead, feeling my heart thump. My jaw was clenched, and my shoulders were stiff. I looked around the living room expecting to see water dripping from the ceiling or forming a puddle on the floor, but everything was dry. The only noise was that persistent drip, drip, drip in the back of my mind. Sleep came in short bursts. Each time I drifted off, I saw the well. Each time I heard the voice, I'd jolt awake, gasping, my chest tight. My pillow was damp with sweat. By morning, I felt exhausted. I got out of bed, went to the kitchen, and forced myself to run water in the sink to rinse a coffee mug. My hands trembled as I turned the handle. The water splashed, and I felt that same sense of being watched. My skin tingled. I hurried through it, not daring to let the water run for more than a few seconds. I decided I couldn't go on like this. I grabbed the ring from my nightstand. It felt icy in my hand, like it had been in a freezer. I pocketed it and walked into the yard. I stood by the well, listening for anything. The air felt still. My stomach turned, and I thought I might vomit. I forced myself to grab the chain on the iron lid. I dragged it aside, the screeching metal hurting my ears. I set the lid down, knelt by the edge, and took the ring from my pocket. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. The well's darkness stretched below me. I held the ring over the gap. My breath caught in my throat. The voice echoed in my ears. "Give it back," as if it came from inside my skull. My hands shook. The ring slipped from my fingers and disappeared into the black. For a moment, I just stayed there listening. I heard nothing at first. Then, a single drip echoed from the depths. My arms and legs felt weak. I replaced the lid, shutting it as securely as I could. My entire body felt tense, and I trudged back inside, not looking behind me. I stood at my kitchen sink for a few minutes, letting the water run. I washed my hands, waiting for that sense of being watched to return. It was still there, but fainter. When I turned off the faucet, I listened for the drip, drip, drip. It wasn't as loud. I still felt uneasy, but it seemed like a layer of pressure had lifted from my shoulders. I don't know if that fixed anything completely, but I'm starting to sleep again. The dreams aren't as vivid now. Sometimes I still hear a faint drip in the walls, but I don't feel my heart racing like before. The voice hasn't come back in the same way. I keep an eye on the backyard, checking that old well from time to time. I haven't heard the metal lid shift or seen anything unusual, but I don't let my guard down. I can't forget how that ring felt in my hand, or how the water seemed to follow me. Every time I hear a random drip in the house now, I pause and listen. I don't know if the well is truly settled, or if that presence is still waiting, but at least I can stand at the sink and run the faucet without feeling something breathing down my neck. For now, that's good enough for me. I started paying attention to that cafeteria about 2 weeks ago. I was standing in line at the security checkpoint when I heard someone mention weird noises coming from the old dining hall. At first, I shrugged it off because people love to start rumors around here. The industrial complex where I work is old and has a lot of unused rooms. Strange sounds are common. Pipes rattle, vents hum, and the structure creaks at night. I've never been sensitive to that stuff. But this cafeteria felt different from the start. I walked into the building's main corridor that day, feeling a slight chill because the air conditioning always runs too cold. The corridor lights flickered, like they do when the maintenance guys forget to change the bulbs. I saw the cafeteria door at the end. It's a large steel door with scratched paint. It's heavy and it always squeaks when it opens. The sound echoes in the corridor. which can be unsettling when you're alone. I pushed it open and stepped inside. My first impression was how dim it was. The overhead lights worked, but many bulbs were dead or dying. The long tables stood in rows, each one with benches on both sides. I noticed that a few tables at the far end had plates and utensils on them, even though nobody was eating there. I thought maybe some workers had left their stuff behind, or the cleaning crew hadn't bothered to clear it. I didn't focus on it too much. I just remembered feeling a slight unease, like I was intruding somewhere I shouldn't be. That same day, around lunch hour, I returned to see if the cafeteria was actually in use. People usually eat in the newer, renovated wing. They don't come here. But I thought maybe there was a reason for the plates. When I stepped in, the place was empty. It smelled stale, like old food that had been left out too long. The air felt heavy, and my eyes watered a bit from the musty odor. There were more plates on the tables, and I saw smudges on the surfaces that looked like rust stains. The utensils were arranged in neat rows. Knives, forks, and spoons were lined up, but they were tarnished and dull. It looked like they'd been sitting there for decades. I walked around the tables, checking for signs of fresh food or anything that would explain it. I didn't see any actual food, just those rusty stains that reminded me of dried sauce or maybe old metal residue. I heard a faint rattling sound coming from the far corner, so I headed there. The kitchen area is separated by a large window and a metal counter. I peeked inside and saw outdated equipment, old stoves, ovens, and a refrigerator that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The rattling stopped when I reached the doorway. I flipped on the light switch, but nothing happened. I heard a slight hum, but the bulbs stayed dark. I stayed there for a minute, listening. The room was silent except for the buzzing of a fluorescent light on the ceiling. It flickered at an uneven pace. I didn't feel any breeze or see anyone moving. Still, I sensed a presence, like someone was standing behind me. I turned around quickly, but all I saw was the empty cafeteria. I felt my heart thumping, my palms got sweaty, and my throat went dry. I took a few steps back toward the main dining area. The smell of old food got stronger, making my stomach tighten. Later, when I told my coworkers about the plates and utensils, they just gave me weird looks. One guy said I probably saw some junk left behind by previous tenants. Another person told me to ignore it because the old section was full of mold and rotten equipment. He warned me to stay out, claiming it was easy to get sick there. But nobody admitted hearing things. They just said that the building was old and made noises. I started to doubt myself. I thought maybe I was imagining things. The next day, though, I heard something that I couldn't explain. I was walking past the cafeteria in the late afternoon. Our shifts can be long, and I sometimes stay until early evening. The corridor was quiet except for my footsteps. Then I heard clinking sounds like forks and knives hitting plates. It didn't sound like one or two people. It sounded like a busy dinner rush, with multiple sets of silverware scraping plates at once. It reminded me of a crowded restaurant, except I knew this place was abandoned. The noise echoed down the corridor, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. I turned the corner and stood in front of the cafeteria door. The clinking was louder. It had a steady rhythm, like a group of people were actually eating. I hesitated before opening the door. My breath felt shallow. I put my hand on the doorknob and pushed. The squeak of the hinges cut through the noise, and the clinking stopped abruptly, like someone flipped a switch. I looked around. Nobody was there. The tables were set again, but this time, there were more plates and utensils than before. I counted at least 12 sets spread across 3 tables. Each plate had those same rust-colored marks. The forks, knives, and spoons looked older, more tarnished, and arranged in neat positions, as if ready for a meal. I walked slowly, feeling my heart hammer against my chest. The overhead lights buzzed. The stale smell was stronger than the day before. I sniffed the air, and it reminded me of leftover gravy that had been left out in the heat. I felt my stomach turn. I didn't see actual food anywhere, just the smell of something old and spoiled. My eyes watered again, and I backed away, unsure if I was going to gag. I wondered who was setting the tables. I looked for any footprints or signs of recent activity, but saw nothing unusual on the floor, just dust and some scattered debris. I decided to leave and report it to someone. Maybe security would check it out. But by the time I reached the security office, they were dealing with another issue and brushed me off. One guard joked that the ghosts of the cafeteria were messing with me. He didn't take it seriously. Another guard told me to stop wandering into that part of the building. I felt frustrated and a bit embarrassed. I went home that night with an unsettled feeling. I couldn't sleep well. I kept thinking about those plates. In my dreams, I heard forks scraping ceramic and saw shapes sitting at those tables. I jolted awake with sweat dripping from my forehead. My sheets felt damp. I stared at the dark ceiling, trying to calm my breathing. I decided I'd go back the next day. I needed to see if I was losing my mind, or if something was actually happening. The following morning I felt drained, but I went straight to the cafeteria. It was early and the corridors were mostly empty. I noticed the door was slightly open. That was unusual because it's a heavy door that doesn't just stay open on its own. I entered quietly, not wanting to disturb anything. The air was thick and smelled of something burnt. I squinted in the dim light. The tables were set again, and the plates looked chipped this time. The utensils had more stains on them. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if they had always been that chipped and I just hadn't noticed. Then I heard a faint whisper, like someone saying my name. My heart skipped a beat. I froze. The whisper came from the corner near the kitchen window. I walked in that direction, step by step. My boots crunched on broken pieces of what looked like porcelain on the floor. I reached the counter and peered over it. The whisper stopped. My name lingered in my ears. My arms felt covered in goosebumps. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to steady my breathing, but I felt a tremor in my legs. I leaned forward to see if anyone was behind the counter. There was nothing there. The only thing I saw was a stack of dusty trays. I told a friend at work about the whisper. He laughed and told me I was overworked, but I knew I wasn't making this up. I decided to record video on my phone the next time I visited. So after my shift, I returned with my phone's camera ready. I stood in the corridor and hit record. I took a slow, steady breath and opened the cafeteria door. My phone's flashlight lit the space in a weak cone of light. My hands felt cold, and my heart pounded. I heard a faint clinking again, but softer than before. I panned my phone around, capturing the tables and chairs. There was nobody in the video. The sound didn't seem to pick up on the recording either. I checked it afterward, and it was just silence. But I heard it in person. It sounded like distant metal scraping on ceramic. I walked to the first table, shining my light on the plates. They were dusty. The utensils had faint spots that looked like old rust, or maybe dried something else. I touched one of the forks. It felt rough, and small flakes came off on my fingers. I smelled my hand. It had a metallic odor. I wiped it on my pants, feeling uneasy. I approached the second table. The plates were spaced out perfectly, like each seat had been carefully set. I ran my flashlight over them and saw some sort of smear in the center of one plate. It was dark brown, almost black, and it had a crusty texture. I felt my stomach tighten. I leaned in to get a better look, and my flashlight started flickering. I tapped the phone, but the light kept going in and out. My name echoed in my head again, like a whisper I couldn't trace. I swung around, checking behind me, but I only saw the empty rows of tables. I felt a rush of panic and rushed out. The door slammed behind me with that same squeak. I almost ran straight into a coworker. He asked me why I looked so pale. I told him the cafeteria was messed up, and he just shrugged. I realized then that nobody else took this seriously. They either didn't care or thought I was losing it. I spent the next few days avoiding that place, hoping it would all go away. I focused on my daily tasks, trying to keep my mind off the noises and smells. But the cafeteria didn't leave me alone. I started hearing those clinks and whispers even when I was far from that area. I'd be in the break room in the newer wing, and I'd catch that faint sound of utensils hitting plates. I'd ask my coworkers if they heard it, but they always said no. My appetite got worse. I'd sit to eat, and I'd imagine a rancid smell. I'd push my food away and end up throwing it out. My hands shook at random times. I'd break out in sweat when I remembered the condition of those plates. After another week, I decided to check again. I felt like I needed proof or closure. I told myself I'd go in, take photos or video and show people. If nothing showed up, I'd see a doctor. I planned to do it in the late afternoon when the sunlight still came through the high windows. That part of the complex has windows up near the ceiling, allowing some light in before sunset. I arrived at the cafeteria door. The corridor was empty. I opened the door and braced myself. Inside, the tables were set once more, but now there were more of them. It was like additional tables had been moved in, forming 2 extra rows in the back. They all had plates and utensils. I counted at least 20 sets. My throat felt tight. The smell of stale food was almost overwhelming. It felt like breathing in damp, rotten fabric. I covered my nose with my sleeve and stepped forward. I took out my phone and started recording video. I aimed the camera at the tables, then at the ceiling, trying to show the entire space. I walked slowly, explaining in a low voice what I was seeing. My hands were shaky, but I kept recording. As I passed each table, I saw fresh marks on the plates. Some looked like new rust spots, others looked like smears of old sauce. I moved toward the kitchen counter again, shining my phone's flashlight. That's when I heard my name, clear as day. It was a hiss, almost like a breathy call. I jerked the phone around, trying to catch whoever said it. There was nobody in sight. My chest tightened, and my heart raced. My pulse pounded in my ears. My phone's screen showed the dim tables, empty chairs, and scattered utensils. I couldn't see a single person. Then a series of clinks erupted, louder than before. It sounded like many forks and knives hitting plates over and over. I felt my scalp prickle and my knees threatened to buckle. I stared at the tables, but they were all still. Yet the sound continued, as if dozens of invisible people were having some strange meal. My phone captured only muffled static. My name came again, a slow whisper that seemed right next to my ear. I spun around, expecting to see a face inches from mine, but there was nothing. My mouth went dry and I could barely swallow. My breath came out in quick gasps. The clinking rose to a frantic pace. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran for the door, my steps echoing off the walls. I burst into the corridor. The noise stopped the instant I crossed the threshold. My phone kept recording. I pressed stop and stood there panting. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my phone. I forced myself to check the footage. The video showed me walking through the cafeteria, describing what I saw. But the audio was mostly quiet. There was a faint buzzing sound, maybe from the lights, but I couldn't hear any of the intense clinking or whispers. My voice was there, though, explaining everything I saw. It was proof that I was physically there, but it didn't capture the disturbing noises that filled my ears. I still work in that complex. I still see the cafeteria door whenever I walk past it. I don't go inside anymore. Nobody has believed me so far. They say it's in my head or it's just the old pipes. But I know what I heard and saw. Sometimes late at night I swear I catch that stale odor in the hallway. My pulse spikes and I hurry away. I hear the faint rattle of utensils and plates echoing in my mind. I feel like something in there wants me to come back. I still hear that voice calling my name, asking me to join a meal that never ends. When it happens, my chest tightens and my stomach twists. My skin goes cold. I tell myself not to listen, not to step through that door again. But every day I think about it. I can't explain any of it. I just know it's real. I've heard the sounds, smelled the rotting food, and touched those dirty utensils. There's something in that cafeteria that sets it up again and again, always ready, always waiting. And I can't shake the feeling that it's waiting for me. I never expected my night shift to turn into something so unsettling. I sit at my desk on the top floor of a quiet building, surrounded by dark corridors and buzzing fluorescent lights. The office is normally peaceful at night. I hear the hum of the vending machine in the break room and the low drone of the air conditioning. Sometimes I listen to music through my earbuds to stay awake. But lately, I've been too on edge to block out any sounds. There's a tension I can't ignore. It started about 2 weeks ago. I was typing an email when I noticed something move at the far end of the corridor. It was just a dark figure shifting from one side of the hallway to the other. At first, I thought it was a coworker who accidentally stayed late. But then I realized no one else was scheduled. The figure wore an old-style hat and faded clothes. He didn't make a sound, and for a moment, I thought the flickering lights were playing tricks on me. The moment passed, and I shook it off. I went back to my work, convinced I was just tired. A few nights later, the same thing happened. This time, I was sure it was a man. He walked slowly and disappeared through the wall at the end of the corridor. My throat went dry. I wasn't sure what I had just seen. I got up, walked down the hall, and looked at the wall. It was solid. I pressed my hand against it. It felt cold. There was no door, no opening, just a wall leading to an empty office space on the other side. When I stood there, a chill ran over my arms. It was like the air was heavier, and I felt pins and needles on the back of my neck. I went back to my desk, feeling on edge. I tried to rationalize it, but it stuck in my mind. Every shift after that had small moments when I would see him in the corner of my eye. He wore the same hat and the same clothes, like he was stuck in time. I got this strange feeling he was guiding me somewhere. He never spoke, never gestured, but there was a sense of direction in the way he turned corners. It was as if he wanted me to follow. My stomach would tighten every time I saw him. My chest would pound, and I'd hesitate to move. But the curiosity was stronger each time, and I found myself walking a few steps toward him before he vanished. I learned from a coworker that there was a floor in the building that had been shut down for structural issues. They closed it off 5 years ago. No one is allowed up there, and the elevator won't stop at that level. Some people claim it's unsafe, with cracks in the foundation and exposed wiring. Others say it's just a cost-saving decision by the owners. Either way, it's off limits. The only access might be through the service stairs, but those are locked. I started to connect that closed floor with the figure I was seeing. My instincts told me that was where he wanted me to go. I tried to ignore it, but every night, it became harder to resist. One night, I decided to explore the hallway where I always saw him. I grabbed a flashlight and told myself I was just investigating a weird electrical problem. My heart pounded in my ears as I walked toward the far end of the corridor. The lights there flicker more often, and the paint on the walls is peeling in small patches. The air felt damp. It smelled like stale water and old paper. I heard my own footsteps echo, and I paused every few seconds to see if I could catch a glimpse of him. Nothing happened at first. I reached the end of the corridor, shone my flashlight on the walls, and saw no seams or hidden doors. I rested my hand on the wall, pressing my palm against the surface. It felt a bit uneven, like there might be a slight crack beneath the paint. Suddenly I heard a soft shuffle behind me. I spun around. My flashlight beam shook with my unsteady hand. For just a split second I saw the man again. He was farther down the corridor, facing me. His head was tilted and his hat cast a slight shadow over his eyes. I heard my breath catch in my throat. My legs tensed, ready to run. Then he took a step backward and vanished through the wall to his left. My heart hammered. I stood there, stunned. Then I walked quickly back to my desk. I couldn't focus on work the rest of the night. I sat there, restless, jumping at every little noise. The ceiling creaked once and I almost fell out of my chair. Over the next few days, I found it hard to sleep. I kept thinking about that moment when he looked at me. He didn't look threatening. He just looked like he was waiting. My nerves were shot, but I felt drawn to find out what was on that closed floor. I asked another coworker about the building's history. He didn't know much, just that the top floors used to house different companies, and eventually they consolidated everyone into fewer levels to save money. He had never heard about any accidents or anything tragic. He just said the place was old. That didn't calm me down. I decided to bring a small camera with me to see if I could capture anything. I set it up on a tripod aimed at the corridor where I always saw him. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, I checked the footage and saw a faint distortion in the exact spot where he normally appears. It wasn't clear, but it made the hair on my arm stand up. The next night, I tried to stay up late and watch the corridor in real time. I sipped strong coffee until my hands trembled. At around 3 a.m., I saw him again. He walked straight through the same wall. This time I managed to walk right behind him, ignoring the fear twisting in my gut. But when I reached the wall, it was solid. I knocked on it. It made a dull thud. Nothing about it was unusual, except for a slight draft coming from somewhere. I felt the draft on my face. It was a cold, light flow of air. I ran my hand along the base of the wall and felt a small gap near the floor. I couldn't tell where it led. I thought about prying it open, but I was too freaked out. Instead, I went back to my desk, determined to check the building's floor plans online. After some searching, I found an old blueprint. It showed a hidden service passage that connected this corridor to the closed floor. It must have been used for maintenance decades ago. I thought about that strange man appearing right where the passage would be. My palms sweated. I realized that if I wanted to see where he was going, I would need to access that hidden route. On my next shift, I brought a small toolbox. I waited until well after midnight. The building was silent except for the occasional beep of the elevator and the hum of electricity in the walls. My heart felt heavy, and my breathing was uneven. I walked to the corridor, got on my knees, and used a screwdriver to chip away at the base of the wall. The plaster was old and it crumbled easily. A piece of wood gave way, and I saw a dark space behind it. It was just large enough to crawl through. My stomach churned. I had an overwhelming urge to turn around and pretend I never saw it, but my curiosity burned. I squeezed through the gap. Inside, it was pitch black. I turned on my flashlight and saw a narrow hallway that smelled like damp concrete. The walls were rough with exposed pipes overhead. The space felt claustrophobic, and I had to hunch my shoulders to keep moving. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight, and each step made a hollow echo. The corridor led to a rusty door at the far end. My hands shook as I reached out to touch the handle. It was ice cold. I twisted it, and the door creaked open. I stepped out onto the closed floor. The hallway there looked similar to the one upstairs, but older. The paint was peeling in large sheets, and some tiles were missing. A few light fixtures were hanging loosely from the ceiling. No lights were on, so I kept my flashlight trained ahead. It was quiet except for a faint dripping sound. I saw a row of abandoned office rooms, some with broken desks and scattered papers. I felt my pulse race. The tension in my stomach was almost unbearable. I couldn't tell if I was trembling from fear or adrenaline. I walked slowly, pausing to listen. Every now and then, I thought I heard a faint shuffle of steps. Then I caught a glimpse of him at the end of the hall. He turned the corner. My mouth went dry and my lungs tightened. I forced myself to follow. The floor felt uneven under my shoes, and I worried about holes or loose tiles. The flashlight beam shook in my hand. As I turned the corner, I saw an open door to what looked like a storage room. The man was inside, standing with his back to me. I entered the room. It was cold and smelled like musty cardboard. Old file boxes were stacked against the walls. The man stood near a collapsed shelving unit. He was motionless. I noticed how pale his skin looked under the faint light. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and nervous. I took one slow step toward him. He turned his head slightly, like he was aware of me. My heart throbbed against my chest. Then he stepped forward and vanished through the wall. I heard a low scraping sound, like metal dragging on the floor. I ran to the spot where he disappeared. The wall there was cracked. I could see part of a broken pipe behind it. There was a small piece of metal protruding from the rubble. I crouched down and tugged on it. It was stuck, so I pulled harder. A chunk of plaster came loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, I found an old metal box. My hands were shaking as I lifted it out. It was heavy and covered in rust. I set it on the floor and tried prying it open. The lid resisted at first, but it finally gave way with a sharp squeak. It didn't contain anything dramatic. There were some old documents and a faded photograph of the building in an earlier era. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I recognized the corridor in the photo. The man in the hat was there, standing on the edge of the frame, just barely visible. A wave of cold tension spread through my back. I realized I was covered in sweat. My shirt stuck to my skin, and I noticed my breathing was fast and shallow. I didn't see anything else of interest in the box, just official papers with building permits and a few signatures. My flashlight flickered. The batteries were running low. I stuffed the photo in my pocket, picked up the metal box, and hurried out. I felt an overpowering need to leave that floor. My legs felt weak and each step jarred my knees. I retraced my path down the hallway, back through the rusty door, and into the hidden passage. I crawled back through the gap into my familiar corridor, breathing hard. I slammed the loose panel back into place, trying to make it look somewhat normal. Then I headed straight for my desk. I wiped sweat from my forehead and took a long drink from my water bottle. My hands wouldn't stop shaking and my heart was still pounding. I kept expecting to see him pop up around the corner, but everything was quiet. I stayed there for a while, trying to calm down. Eventually, my shift ended. I tucked the metal box under my arm and went home. When I got to my apartment, I looked through the documents more carefully. They were mostly technical details about the building's construction. There was one note that mentioned hidden passages for wiring and maintenance. The old photo was the most unsettling part. The man in the hat was standing next to a group of workers. His face was partially in shadow, but the hat was the same, and his clothes looked identical to what I had seen. My hands felt clammy and I set the photo aside. I still work the night shift. Sometimes I catch myself staring down the corridor, waiting to see him. Other times, I force myself to keep my eyes on the computer screen. The memory of him walking through the walls is burned into my mind. I haven't gone back to the closed floor since that night. I think about it constantly, though. I wonder if he's still there, waiting for me to return. I keep the box locked in a cabinet near my desk, unsure of what else to do with it. Even now, when I'm alone in that hallway, I feel the temperature drop. The air gets heavy and my muscles tense up. I remember that final moment in the storage room, seeing him disappear. I can't forget the scraping sound in the rusted box. I have no idea why he led me to it. But every time I think about it, I feel a strange sense of urgency, like I'm missing something crucial. My focus slips during the night, and I find myself looking for him again. I'm not sure what happens next. Part of me wants to push this away and just do my job. Another part of me wants to open that passage again and keep searching. The presence of that man is always in the back of my mind. I don't know who he is or what he wants, but I do know I can't shake the feeling that I'll see him again soon. Until then, I'll keep working these long nights, listening for footsteps and watching the corners of my eyes for movement that shouldn't be there. And if he appears again, I don't think I'll be able to resist following him one more time. I never expected a single book to turn my life upside down. I collect rare volumes all the time. It's my main hobby, and I've spent years digging through estate sales, online auctions, and dusty old shops. I'm used to weird covers, strange inscriptions, and all kinds of odd smells. I've seen moldy pages, broken spines, and corners gnawed by rats. None of that fazes me. But this book, this blank, coverless thing, made me question my own senses. I found it at a small auction a few months ago. The auction house specialized in random artifacts and odd curios. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I just saw this stack of books in a corner and felt drawn to them. Most had normal jackets or obvious titles. This one looked different. It had no cover, no identifying marks on the spine, nothing on the first or last page. The paper looked yellowed, but not like normal aging. It had a sickly tint, almost grayish, as if left in a damp basement for too long. The binding was partially torn, and the pages looked like they might fall out if I wasn't careful. I held it in my hands. I flipped through the pages and saw lines of text that made no sense. It wasn't in any language I recognized. I felt this chill on the back of my neck, but I thought it was just the drafty room. I ended up buying it, mainly because nobody else wanted it. I brought it home and put it on my shelf. I have a dedicated spot for strange books, a few obscure volumes, and other odd finds. I felt a bit proud. I'd never come across a text I couldn't identify at all. Usually I can recognize a language or at least a script. This one looked like a mismatch of glyphs, weird scribbles and some lines in what could have been Latin, but it wasn't consistent. The first night I didn't notice anything. I put the book on the shelf, locked up, and went to bed. The next morning I was looking for another book I needed for some research. My shelves are organized by sections, each dedicated to a certain topic or type. As I reached for the new acquisition to look at it again, I saw it was gone. That didn't make sense. I checked the other shelves thinking I might have forgotten where I placed it. It wasn't there. I started checking my table, my office drawers, even my bag. Nowhere. I shrugged it off, figured I misplaced it and it would turn up eventually. Around lunchtime, I was in my living room, straightening up a few items. I found the book sitting on my coffee table, wide open. The pages were covered in new markings. It wasn't just the weird text from before. It had fresh scribbles along the margins. Some looked like small circles and triangles. Others looked like jagged lines. They were all drawn in a dark red pen. I didn't remember owning a pen with that color. It smelled metallic, sharp. I closed the book and carried it back to my library. The pages felt damp against my fingers. That moment, I got this wave of nausea, like my stomach flipped. But I chalked it up to skipping breakfast. I placed it back on the shelf. I made sure to wedge it between two thick volumes so it wouldn't slip out. Then I left the room. 10 minutes later, I walked by again and glanced over. The space was empty. The other books were still in the same position, but the new one was gone. I walked in feeling a spike of adrenaline in my chest. My pulse pounded in my ears. I checked every shelf. Nothing. I scanned the floor. Nothing. I checked my desk. Nothing. Then I heard a thump behind me. I turned and saw the book lying near the door, open face down. It must have fallen from somewhere, but there was no shelf above that spot. I wasn't sure what to think. My mouth felt dry and my mind started racing, but I wanted an explanation that made sense, so I told myself I must have bumped something. Over the next few days, I noticed more strange behavior. In the middle of the night, I'd hear a faint rustling from somewhere in the house. It reminded me of pages turning. At first, I thought it was just the wind or the sound of the heating system. Sometimes it sounded like footsteps, but not heavy. More like a soft shuffle, almost too light to be human. My heart would pound and I'd lie in bed, rigid, holding my breath. In the mornings, I'd find the book in odd places, behind the couch, under the kitchen table, even on the bathroom sink. Each time, it seemed to have new markings on random pages. The scribbles got bolder, thicker. Some pages had doodles of eyes, others had random shapes. I couldn't find any pattern. I tried searching online for the symbols, but nothing matched. I decided to set up a camera in my library. I used a small webcam pointed at the shelf where I kept the book. I thought maybe I was sleepwalking or had an intruder. It was the only logical idea I could come up with. That night, I sat in my living room with my laptop. I watched the live feed for hours. Everything was quiet. Around 2 a.m., I got up to get some water. When I came back, the book was gone from the feed. I rewound the footage and saw something impossible. One frame showed the book sitting there, and the next frame it vanished. There was no movement, no blur, no hand reaching out. It was just gone in less than a second. I froze. My hand started shaking. My chest felt tight. My mouth went dry. I replayed it 3 times, and each time it was the same. One frame it's there, the next frame it's not. No flicker, no sign of tampering. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I checked the rest of the house, flipping on every light as I went. Eventually, I found the book on my hallway floor. It was open to a page with a new string of symbols. My heart was racing. I pressed my fingertips against the page and the paper felt cold, almost icy. The rest of the house felt normal, so I grabbed the book and shoved it in a closet. Then I locked the closet door. That gave me a small feeling of control. The next day, I tried contacting an acquaintance who knows a lot about rare texts. He asked for photos. I snapped a few pictures with my phone and sent them over. He said he'd never seen anything like it. He thought it might be some obscure coded journal or a forgery of an ancient grimoire. He asked if he could look at it in person. I said yes, figuring maybe he'd find some clue about its origin. But then I realized I didn't want to mail it or take it anywhere. It felt safer to keep it locked up at home. I told him I'd get back to him. Things got worse. The book started showing up outside the closet. I checked the closet door. The lock was still intact. The book would be perched on my kitchen counter or on a chair or even at the foot of my bed. One time, I woke up and nearly kicked it across the floor because it was right beside my foot. My heart hammered and I jumped out of bed. My body was covered in cold sweat. My hair was sticking to my forehead. I felt shaky all over. I grabbed the book and tossed it onto the floor. It made a dull thud and flopped open. There were scribbles that looked fresh with lines that shined in the light. It looked wet, but there was no liquid I could identify. One afternoon, I heard a scratching sound coming from my office. It was a steady rasp, like a pen scrawling across paper. I found the book on my desk open with the pen pressed to one of the pages. The pen moved, but there was no hand holding it. The tip scratched across the paper, leaving more symbols. My hands started shaking. I shouted something. It might have been a curse or just a loud noise, I'm not sure. The pen stopped moving. It clattered onto the desk. Then the book slammed shut. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding, my breath coming in short gasps. I felt sweat trickling down my neck. I had no idea how to explain what I just saw. No one else was in the house. The windows were locked, and the door was shut. There was no logical explanation. I realized I needed to get rid of this thing. I took it outside and placed it in a cardboard box. I drove it to a local recycling center. My hands shook on the steering wheel, but I forced myself to keep going. When I arrived, I shoved the box into one of the big bins. I watched it slide down into the pile of papers. I stood there for a full minute, breathing hard, my pulse hammering in my skull. Then I got in my car and drove home. For a few hours, I felt relieved. I cleaned my house, tidied up shelves, tried to distract myself. That night, I slept a bit better. But the next morning, as I passed by my office, I saw the book on my chair again. It looked even older, like the edges had started to fray more. The scribbles on the cover page had grown darker. I felt a jolt, like a punch to the gut. My hands turned cold and I almost dropped my mug. I realized there was no easy way to abandon this thing. I tried burning it in my fireplace. I hesitated when I saw the flames licking the wood, but I couldn't let this continue. I tossed the book onto the fire. The edges began to curl. Smoke rose from the pages. I watched, half expecting it to scream or something. The fire crackled. The pages blackened. I felt a bizarre mix of hope and fear. Then the flames sputtered out. The book sat there, partly singed, but not destroyed. The smell made my eyes water. It wasn't the usual burning paper smell. It was more like sulfur, with a strong rotten edge. My throat clenched and I coughed. I grabbed a poker and tried to stir the flames, but the logs collapsed into ash. The book looked scarred, but still intact. I pulled it out with a set of tongs, my hands shaking. The black marks on the cover formed new symbols. I felt like I was going to pass out from the stench. I ended up throwing the book into a metal trash can outside. I doused it with water and slammed the lid on top. I stayed there, leaning against the wall, breathing in short bursts until the smell cleared. When I came back inside, I found wet footprints leading from the back door to my library. The footprints were small, but definitely not mine. They seemed to vanish near the shelf where I used to keep the book. I just stared at them, my chest tight and my lungs feeling like they wouldn't expand properly. I tried to calm down. I drank some water, splashed my face, did all the normal things people do to shake off a bad dream. But this was real. The footprints stayed on the floor until they dried. After that, I couldn't tell if I'd hallucinated them or if they were truly there. I decided to confront the book directly. I opened it, ignoring the rotting smell that came off its pages. I wanted to see if there was a clue or some sign that would help me understand it. The text still looked random, but I noticed that some lines seemed to repeat. The scribbles had grown larger. They overlapped the original text, making it even harder to read. My eyes started watering and I felt a burning sensation in my nose. I flipped through the pages, searching for anything that might look familiar. Halfway through, I spotted a small note in what looked like shaky English. "Don't look for me." My stomach twisted. I slammed the book shut and tossed it on my desk. I backed away, trying to calm my pounding heart. Over the next few hours, I tried ignoring the book. I stayed in my living room, watched random videos, anything to keep my mind off what was happening. But the tension never left my body. I kept glancing around, expecting to see it lurking on a shelf or on my couch. Every sound in the house felt amplified. Every creak made me jump. When the sun went down, the silence became unbearable. I could hear my own breathing echo in my ears. I finally worked up the nerve to check my office. The door creaked as I opened it. The book was gone from the desk. The pen was on the floor, a small puddle of that metallic-smelling ink next to it. I felt a chill on my arms, like someone had opened a window, but the window was shut tight. I noticed the closet door was ajar. I walked over, slow and careful. My heartbeat thudded in my eardrums. When I looked inside, there it was, on the top shelf, leaning against a box. It was open, pages turned to a spread filled with black scrawl. I reached for it. The page felt cold and slightly damp. My hand tingled. I quickly pulled back. Something about that surface felt wrong, like touching decayed flesh. I clenched my fists and forced myself to grab it again. I lifted it off the shelf and set it on the floor. I don't know if there's an entity living in this book or if I'm just imagining everything. All I can tell is that it moves when I'm not looking. It appears in strange places. It writes in itself with no human hand. It makes me feel watched all the time. My head aches constantly, and I can't sleep without checking every room. There's a pressure in the air around me, like the house itself is holding its breath. I'm not sure what to do next. Throwing it away didn't work. Burning it didn't work. Locking it up didn't work. I'm stuck with it. Every time I try to get rid of it, it comes back. It leaves symbols. It moves on its own. It drags me further into its mystery, and I can't stop thinking about it. I keep waiting for the moment it vanishes for good, but I suspect it won't leave. It feels like it's attached to me now. The more I notice it, the more it responds, and I can't stop noticing it's always there in the back of my mind. I wish I never bought it, but I can't take that back. All I can do is sit here, hearing it shuffle in the next room, flipping its own pages. Sometimes I walk in and it's on the floor, open as if waiting. Sometimes it's on my couch, scribbles all over a new page. I keep telling myself I'll get rid of it, that I'll find a way to destroy it. But I haven't succeeded yet. And every attempt I make seems to fuel it even more. Right now it's in my office. I can hear the faint sound of paper moving, like a whisper. If I stand outside the door, I can see the edge of a page turning. I'm scared to go in. I'm scared to leave it alone. But I can't just sit here forever. My palms are sweating. My stomach is in knots. My heart feels like it's about to burst out of my chest. I have no idea what it wants. But I know it's not done with me. And I have no clue what will happen next. I always thought my apartment was too small and too ordinary to hide anything strange. It's just 4 rooms and a narrow hallway. I don't keep a lot of stuff out in the open, and I usually feel comfortable here. But over the last couple of weeks, something weird has been happening every single night after I shower. It's not just a random noise or a creaky pipe. It's this eerie sound that I can't ignore. An extra footstep behind me, matching every move I make when I'm barefoot on the floor. At first I thought I was imagining it. Now I'm not so sure. And the worst part is that I'm starting to see 2 sets of wet footprints on the floor, mine, and another set that appears right beside them. I live alone on the 2nd floor of a pretty old building. There's an elevator, but it rattles so much that I prefer the stairs. My apartment door opens directly into my living room. The furniture is basic. a small sofa, a coffee table, and a TV stand. A cramped kitchen sits to the left, and a short hallway leads to my bedroom and bathroom. It's not a fancy place, but it's enough for me. I've been here for about a year, and nothing out of the ordinary has ever happened. I usually shower in the evening. It's a habit I picked up because my work can get me sweaty or covered in dust. I never wear slippers or flip-flops afterward. Instead, I like to walk around barefoot. The tile floor in my living room and hallway feels cool, and I don't mind the slight dampness from my feet. The first time I noticed something strange was about 2 weeks ago. I had just showered and wrapped a towel around my waist. I stepped out of the bathroom and headed to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. As I walked, I heard a soft thump that was out of sync with my steps. I paused and listened, but the apartment was silent. I shrugged and continued to the kitchen. On my way back to the living room, I heard it again. A faint slap against the tile, almost like another bare foot behind me. I froze in place, held my breath, and waited. Nothing. I told myself it was just the sound of water dripping onto the floor from my wet hair, or maybe the squeak of my foot on the tile. I didn't think much of it. The next day I came home late from work, went straight to the shower, and then moved around the apartment barefoot again. This time, I was more alert. I kept thinking about that extra footstep. I listened carefully while I walked from the bathroom to my bedroom. My feet made a clear tap, tap, tap on the floor, and sure enough, I heard an almost identical tap, a fraction of a second later. I spun around. The hallway was empty. My towel fluttered from my sudden turn. I stared down the hall for a few seconds, hearing nothing but my own pulse. Then I looked at the floor. I saw one set of damp footprints, mine. No second set. I sighed and tried to relax. Over the next few days, the extra footstep became more frequent. Every night after my shower, I'd hear my own steps and then that second step. It stayed close but never felt right behind me. It was like it kept a small distance, just enough to make me feel someone was there but not close enough to see. I started to get uncomfortable. I'd walk faster to see if the sound would stop. But it didn't. Sometimes I'd run to my bedroom and shut the door, pressing my ear against it. The apartment would go silent. I'd wait, holding my breath until my heart pounded so hard I couldn't stand it anymore. One night, I decided to check the living room floor for footprints. I walked in a small circle in front of my couch. I saw my own wet tracks on the tile. Then, right next to them, I noticed faint marks, almost the same size as my feet, trailing right behind mine. They were shaped like footprints but lighter, as if they were already starting to dry. I crouched down. My heart was racing. I put my hand on the tile near those footprints. The surface felt slightly cool and damp, as if someone else had been standing there seconds ago. I looked around. My apartment was empty. My hand started to shake a bit, and I stood up, trying to slow my breathing. That's when I started to feel tense even before stepping out of the shower. I'd finish rinsing off and pause for a moment, dreading the moment I opened the bathroom door. I'd stand there dripping water onto the mat, holding my towel, trying to work up the nerve to walk out. But I had to get dressed, so I'd push past my fear, open the door, and step into the hallway. Every time the same thing would happen. I'd walk, and I'd hear that soft step behind me. I'd look back, see nothing, and move on. But it followed me wherever I went. Kitchen, living room, bedroom. Always the same distance, always just out of sight. A few days ago, it got worse. I was in the kitchen, making a quick dinner of scrambled eggs and toast. I had showered earlier and was still barefoot. While I stood at the stove, I heard that slap on the tile. It was closer than usual. I turned around and saw nothing. But right there next to me was a fresh, wet footprint on the floor. It was next to mine, pointed in the same direction as if someone had just walked up to me. I dropped the spatula. My stomach twisted. I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my body. My hands were clammy. I took a few steps back and watched as another footprint formed on the tile, right beside the first one, without any visible person to make it. There was no dripping water from the ceiling or anything else that could cause it. It just appeared. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to grab a paper towel and place it on the footprints. I expected some explanation, maybe a leak or something, but the paper towel just got damp. I threw it in the trash, turned off the stove, and left the kitchen. I didn't even finish cooking. That night I barely slept. Every small creak in the apartment made my muscles tense. I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. Eventually I dozed off, only to wake up a couple of hours later feeling like someone was standing right next to my bed. I shot up, hit the lamp on my nightstand, and twisted around to look. No one was there. I was sweating and my mouth felt like sandpaper. I tried to calm down and told myself I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew something odd was going on. The next morning I checked the apartment for any signs of water leaks or damage. I inspected every corner. Everything was normal. No pipes were broken. No damp spots on the ceiling or walls. The only place I saw anything strange was in the bathroom, where I found 2 sets of footprints in front of the sink. One set clearly belonged to me. The other set was fainter, but it was the same size. It had that same odd spacing between the steps, always right next to mine. I cleaned the floor thoroughly, hoping that would solve it, but that was just wishful thinking. A few nights later, I decided I'd had enough. I was going to walk right into the living room after my shower, turn around fast, and catch whatever was behind me. I stood in the bathroom bracing myself. My legs felt shaky, and my breath was unsteady. I counted to 3 under my breath, opened the door, and rushed out, stepping quickly across the hall and into the living room. I swung around, heart pounding. At first I saw only my wet footprints on the tile. Then right next to them I watched another set of footprints appear step by step, following the path I'd just taken. They formed out of nowhere, making little wet marks on the tile. There was no body, no shadow, nothing that could cause them. My chest felt tight. I clenched my fists and stood completely still. I couldn't breathe right. I could feel my blood pounding in my ears. I glanced up, half expecting to see a shape or a face, but there was nothing. I took a step toward the bathroom. That's when I heard the footstep again, right behind me. I whipped around. No one. I could see the floor. It was empty, except for those footprints. I stepped backward, facing the empty space in front of me. My mind was screaming that this was impossible, but it was happening anyway. My back hit the bathroom door frame, and I almost lost my balance. I grabbed onto the doorknob and rushed inside. I slammed the door and locked it, even though I was alone. My hands were shaking and my heart was pounding so hard that it hurt. I slid down onto the bathroom floor and pressed my back against the tub, curling my knees up to my chest. I stayed like that for what felt like a long time, just trying to breathe normally. When I finally left the bathroom, I didn't see any fresh footprints, but I felt uneasy, like the apartment was holding its breath, waiting for me to let my guard down. I slept on the couch that night with the lights on and the TV playing at low volume. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured those footprints forming behind me again. Over the last few days, I've started noticing those extra footprints in more places. Sometimes they show up in the living room before I even get there, like they're waiting for me. I'll turn a corner and see them near the couch or under the coffee table. Other times, I'll hear that extra step while I'm in the shower. It sounds damp and heavy, right on the other side of the bathroom door. I've stopped using the hallway light because it flickers sometimes, and I don't want any more creepy moments than I already have. I've tried to convince myself this is a trick of my mind. I've looked up stuff online about home repairs, illusions, or even psychological stress. None of it explains the wet footprints that appear right in front of my eyes. I've thought about calling a friend to stay over, but I don't want to explain all of this. It sounds insane. And I'm not sure I want anyone else involved, especially because it might make it worse if more people walk around barefoot and see the same thing happening. Now every time I step out of the bathroom, I feel this surge of dread. It's like I'm expecting something to grab me. My nerves are frayed, my appetite is terrible, and I'm not sleeping enough. The footsteps keep getting louder. Last night, I swear I heard a slight shuffle, like something was brushing against the floor right behind me. When I turned around, I only saw those footprints as usual. I'm starting to think this thing, whatever it is trying to get closer. The footprints appear more often and they seem bolder. Sometimes the second footprints are more soaked, leaving bigger puddles than before. I've started wearing socks around the house, but it doesn't help. The second footprints still show up and they're still bare, as if mocking my attempts to hide. Tonight I'm sitting on my couch, writing this all down in my phone notes, because I need to keep track of what's going on. I feel like any moment now, I'm going to hear that wet slap of a foot on the tile. My palms are sweating and my breathing is shallow. I keep glancing at the hallway, expecting to see a set of footprints forming on the floor. I can't help but imagine that if I suddenly turn around, I might see something standing there staring at me. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I'm not going to run. This is my apartment. I'm not going to move out just because I'm hearing steps. But I'm lying if I say I'm not terrified. I keep a flashlight by my side now, though I'm not sure why. It's not like I can chase footprints away with light, but it makes me feel a little less alone. I can hear the faint drip of my shower head from here. It's just a normal sound, a little drop of water hitting the tub every few seconds. But tonight, it feels menacing. I keep expecting to hear that extra step. My body is tense. My neck is stiff from peering over my shoulder every 5 seconds. I'm thinking maybe I'll just go look. Maybe if I confront it head on, I'll finally see something. I can't keep living like this, jumping at every noise. If I see something, at least I'll know. And if I don't, maybe my mind will calm down. I'm going to stand up, walk into the hallway and check. Maybe I'll turn around real fast and catch whatever's there. All right, I'm getting up now. My legs feel weak, but I'm doing it. My heartbeat is loud. I can hear my own breath. I'm at the edge of the hallway. It's quiet, except for that drip in the bathroom. My bare feet feel cold on the tile. I step forward. 1 step, 2 steps. I hear a wet slap behind me. I spin around, shining my flashlight right where the second footstep should be. I see it, the wet footprint, still forming, right beside mine. There's nobody here. My stomach twists into a knot. My breath catches in my throat. I see another footprint forming an inch away from the first. My flashlight illuminates nothing but empty air. I grip the flashlight so hard that my knuckles hurt. I can't stay quiet. My voice is shaking. I say, "What do you want?" There's no response, just the sound of water dripping in the bathroom. My heart is pounding. I take a step back. The second footprints follow, staying right next to mine. My entire body is covered in goosebumps. My mind is screaming for me to run, but my legs won't move fast enough. I'm pretty sure this thing won't stop until I face it. But how do you face something that's invisible? Something that only leaves footprints? I stand there, my feet rooted to the spot. I aim my flashlight everywhere, searching for any sign of a shape or outline. I see nothing, but the footprints keep appearing. They're so close. They're right beside me. I swallow hard, muster all my courage, and take another step. The footsteps mimic me, perfectly in sync. I turn around, shining the flashlight directly behind me. I feel a cold rush of air, like a breeze in a closed hallway. My skin prickles, my spine tingles. I spin back around and see those footprints forming again, right where I'm about to step. I don't know how this ends. I might just keep walking until it finally shows itself. Or I might freeze here, paralyzed by fear. But I can't deny it anymore. I'm not alone in this apartment. Something is here, walking right beside me, copying every step I take, leaving wet footprints that no one else could make. And if I turn around fast enough, maybe I'll finally see it. I can't stop thinking about that hidden level. It's been stuck in my head ever since I first heard about it. The day I found out, I was talking with our building's caretaker in the lobby. He mentioned it like it was nothing, just some offhand comment about a sub-level that didn't show up on any official plans. I stood there, pretending not to be interested, but deep down, my gut tightened. Our condo is new and modern with all the bells and whistles, so hearing about an unlisted floor got my nerves firing. I tried to ask him more, but he clammed up. The look on his face told me there was something he didn't want me to know. I nodded, acted normal, and then spent weeks obsessing over it. I'm a methodical guy. When something nags at me, I don't stop until I get answers. I went through every blueprint the management office had. I compared them to the official permits. I spent late nights squatting near the basement elevator, listening for unusual mechanical sounds. I walked around the perimeter of the building, looking for vents or weird structures that might give away an extra basement. Most people probably would have let it go, but I couldn't. I felt like I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know if that caretaker was messing with me or if something was actually hidden beneath our feet. My first real break came when I discovered a locked metal door near the basement storage area. It wasn't unusual to see locked doors down there. They keep some of the utility stuff secure, but this one felt out of place. It was at the end of a narrow hallway lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs. Everyone else stored their old furniture or boxes in that area, so it was messy. But this door stood out because it had no sign or label. It had a small window, but it was blacked out from the inside. I checked it a few times on different days, always the same. Locked. No sign of use. I considered breaking into it. That might sound reckless, but I was desperate. Before I tried anything stupid, I noticed a smaller door next to it, half hidden behind a row of dusty shelves. That smaller door looked like a maintenance closet. I tested the handle. It turned easily, no resistance. Inside was a cramped space with tools, cleaning supplies, and a narrow flight of metal stairs leading downward. I stared at those stairs for a long minute. They looked older than the rest of the building's construction. The metal railing was chipped, and the steps were a bit rusty. It felt like stepping into another era. I flicked on the light switch on the wall. A single bulb glowed weakly, casting shadows across the steps. My heart was pounding. I told myself I'd only check it out for a second, so I went down. At first, it just looked like an extended maintenance area. The walls were concrete. I could see exposed pipes overhead. There was a faint dripping noise coming from somewhere, echoing in the narrow corridor. It smelled damp, like wet cement and stale air. My footsteps sounded too loud in that cramped space. I kept going until I reached another landing. That's when I saw a short corridor going forward, maybe 50 feet. It had a few bare light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. They were flickering like they were about to burn out. The corridor ended at a plain concrete wall. I stood there, scanning everything. The floor was smooth concrete. The ceiling had more exposed pipes and wires. The air felt heavier and it made me uneasy. I tried to figure out if this was just some leftover construction area. It looked too finished for that, though. The walls were plain, but they were sealed and even. This wasn't just a dirt crawl space, it was intentionally built. I felt a chill run across my arms. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, but I had to see if there was more. I walked down that corridor, watching the lights flicker overhead. Each step seemed to get louder. My breathing felt too noticeable. About halfway down, I started to sense I wasn't alone. It's not like I heard footsteps or anything. It was more like an electric charge in the air. My spine stiffened and my scalp tingled. I stopped and looked ahead. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, as the lights flickered, I caught a glimpse of a figure. It was just a shadowy outline of a person, standing at the very end of the corridor. No movement, no sound. It felt like they were watching me. My heart hammered in my chest. I tightened my fists, unsure if I should call out or run. The flickering lights made it impossible to see any facial features. I only saw a dark silhouette like a statue. My throat was dry and I swallowed hard. Then I took a step forward. I wanted to see who it was. Maybe it was just the caretaker checking on something. Maybe I was hallucinating. I took another step, and that's when the lights blinked out for half a second. When they came back, the corridor ended in a cement wall, and the figure was gone. I stood there, stunned. There was nothing at the end of that corridor except a blank wall. I walked all the way up to it, put my hand on the rough surface. It was solid. There was no door, no sign of an opening. Yet 2 seconds earlier, I saw a person standing right there. My skin crawled. I felt sweat trickle down my back. I couldn't hear anyone running away or any door closing, it just vanished. I hurried out of there, climbed back up the stairs, and shut the maintenance closet behind me. My whole body was shaking. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the lighting played tricks on me. Maybe I was on edge. But it didn't feel like a trick. It felt real. I locked myself in my apartment and tried to calm down. I didn't sleep well that night. Over the next few days, I couldn't focus on my usual life. At work, I stared at my computer without doing much. I kept picturing that corridor, those flickering lights, and that solid cement wall. I thought about telling someone, but who would believe me? Even if they did, I wasn't sure I wanted to share it. It felt personal, like it was my mystery to solve. The caretaker must have known something. One morning, I cornered him by the entrance when he was finishing his routine cleaning. I tried to keep my tone casual, but my pulse was racing. I mentioned the sublevel again, asked if there was any old construction or sealed-off areas in the building. He gave me a tight smile and said everything was in the official plans. I pressed him a bit more, asking if maybe there was a second sub-basement used for storage. His expression hardened. He said I shouldn't worry about things like that, then walked away. That dismissive attitude only fueled my obsession. I started going down to the basement every night, waiting until most people were asleep. I'd slip into the hallway with the locked metal door and stand there, listening. Sometimes I heard that faint dripping noise again, sometimes not. I checked the maintenance closet door a few times. It was never locked, which was strange. I thought about telling building security, but I had no proof of anything illegal, and that caretaker's reaction told me the staff might not be on my side. After about a week of this, I decided to go back down the stairs. I needed to know if that corridor was still there, or if I'd dreamed it up. I came prepared with a small flashlight, a camera on my phone, and gloves. I didn't want to touch anything with bare hands again. My fingers had felt grimy for days after the first visit. I also wore some comfortable shoes in case I had to run. When I opened the maintenance closet, the light was off. The tiny bulb didn't flicker on when I hit the switch. That put me on edge. I clicked my flashlight on, shining it down the metal steps. Nothing looked different, just the same old rusty handrail and the same rough walls. I could smell that stale, damp air again. I moved slowly, trying not to make noise. The steps creaked once or twice. It felt like I was descending into some closed-off tomb. At the bottom, I turned the corner to see if the corridor was there. It was. The same flickering lights were overhead, except this time they seemed even dimmer. I could see the far wall in the distance, the same rough concrete. I walked forward, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. My heart was thumping against my ribcage, and each breath felt quick and shallow. I reached the middle of the corridor where I had first spotted that figure. I stopped, shined my light around. Everything looked empty. The lights overhead buzzed softly. Then I heard a small scrape. It sounded like someone shifting their foot on the concrete. My whole body tensed, and I spun around, shining the flashlight behind me. There was nothing. I stayed still, straining to hear any other sound. My palms were sweaty around the flashlight. Another flicker, and for a second the lights cut out completely. In that moment of darkness, I heard what I swear was breathing, not my own. It was slow and heavy, very close, like someone was standing right behind me. I whipped around, trying to illuminate the space. Still nothing. My pulse was in my ears. I decided to check the far end of the corridor again. If that wall was still solid, then maybe the caretaker or somebody else was messing with me. I reached the wall, ran my hand over the concrete. It felt damp and cold. No seams, no cracks, just a flat surface. I tried pushing on different spots. Nothing gave way. It was maddening. I could feel eyes on me, but I couldn't see anyone. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw a shape at the corridor's entrance, near the stairs. It was just standing there, blocking my path. My flashlight beam caught part of a shoulder or arm, but I couldn't make out a face. It moved to the side, then seemed to vanish into the shadows. I felt my heart pounding so hard it was painful. I yelled, "Hey, who's there?" My voice echoed. No answer. I wanted to run, but I was scared of running right into whoever was lurking there. I took slow steps back toward the stairs, keeping my flashlight in front of me. My hands were shaking. Every few seconds, the overhead lights flickered, making it harder to stay oriented. When I reached the spot where I'd seen the shape, it was empty. No one was there. I had a hollow sensation in my gut. I climbed the stairs as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint. Back in the main basement hallway, I closed the maintenance closet door and leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat. My legs felt weak. I stayed there for a minute, staring at that door, convinced someone might burst through at any second. But it stayed quiet. For the next few weeks, I didn't go near that place. I tried to resume normal life. I watched TV, played some games, tried to forget. But every night, I dreamed about that corridor. I'd see that faceless silhouette watching me. Sometimes I dreamed that the lights stayed off, and I'd feel hands grabbing at me in the dark. I'd wake up with my heart pounding, covered in sweat. Eventually, the nightmares got so bad that I felt I had to do something. I decided to talk to a neighbor I trust. Let's call him Dan. He's a practical guy, works in construction. I told him a bit about the weird corridor, leaving out the creepier details. He laughed at first, saying new buildings sometimes have sealed areas for utilities. I tried to get him to come with me, but he was busy. He said if it bothered me that much, I should talk to management. That wasn't an option. The caretaker's reaction told me management either didn't want to talk about it or had no clue what was really down there. So I kept it to myself. I started noticing little things around the condo, though. The caretaker would watch me when he thought I wasn't looking. A couple of the security guys seemed more alert when I passed by. I even caught one following me into the elevator one night, but he pretended he was just heading to another floor. It felt like they suspected I knew something. I made one final trip down to that sub-level. I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. This time, I bought a small wearable camera. I wanted proof. I also brought a crowbar just in case. I felt ridiculous, like some wannabe ghost hunter, but I wasn't chasing the paranormal. I just wanted answers. It was past midnight when I snuck down. The hallway was quiet, the air still. The flickering light near the locked metal door gave everything a sickly glow. I slipped into the maintenance closet, my camera pinned to my jacket. I had the crowbar in my right hand. The tiny bulb in the closet was out again, so I used my flashlight to guide me down the stairs. Each step creaked. My breath sounded loud in my ears. When I reached the corridor, nothing had changed. The same lights flickered overhead. The same cold air clung to my skin. I started recording with the flashlight off, relying on the overhead bulbs. My camera had a decent low light setting. I walked slowly, aiming the crowbar in front of me like a weapon. My eyes darted around, trying to catch any movement. Halfway down, I heard a faint tap behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight. Empty. My throat felt tight. I kept moving forward, inch by inch. I reached the end of the corridor again. The wall was solid, as always. I lifted the crowbar and struck the concrete. It made a dull clang. Dust shook loose, but the wall didn't crack. I tried a few more hits, with no real effect. Then the lights flickered wildly, plunging me into near darkness. My camera's red light blinked, telling me it was still recording. In that moment, I felt something brush against my left arm, like a hand sliding past. I jerked my arm away, swinging the crowbar blindly. I connected with nothing. The lights came back for a second, and I saw a shape right beside me. It was a dark figure, impossible to see details. I yelled and stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing. I heard a rasping sound like a rough exhale. My neck hair stood on end. For a split second, the overhead bulbs went out completely. The corridor was pitch black. I felt a presence right in front of me, the air shifting. My heart was about to explode. Then the lights came back, dim and flickering. The figure was gone, but my body was shaking from head to toe. My flashlight flickered in my hand, and I realized I was hyperventilating. I backed away, walking sideways so I could keep the entire corridor in view. My camera was still blinking. Once I reached the steps, I turned and bolted up. I could hardly breathe. My throat felt raw. I crashed into the basement hallway and almost dropped my crowbar. Nobody was around. I just stood there panting, trying to slow my pulse. My camera was still recording. My face felt hot and my hands were trembling. I raced back to my apartment and locked the door. I played back the camera footage on my laptop. My hands shook so much it took me 3 tries to open the file. The corridor looked grainy and dark on the screen. I could hear my breathing. I could see the flickering lights. But each time I thought I saw movement, it was too quick or too dark to make out. I did see myself reacting, jumping around, shining the flashlight. But the figure was only a vague blur on the edge of the frame, gone in a split second. There was no clear image of a person, no face, just an unnerving outline for half a second. I've replayed that footage dozens of times, trying to see more. It's not conclusive. Nobody would look at that clip and say, yes, that's a person. They'd say it's just a lighting glitch or my own shadow, but I know what I felt. I've never been so sure of anything. There was someone or something down there, and it doesn't want me wandering around. I still live in this building. I still see the caretaker in the lobby. He doesn't ask me about the sub-level, and I don't bring it up. Some nights I hear strange sounds through the vents, like a distant humming or a scraping noise. I try not to think about it. I haven't gone back down. I can't handle it anymore. My curiosity isn't strong enough to overcome the sheer dread I feel. Sometimes I wonder if I'll move out. It crosses my mind every time I get the elevator down to the basement to pick up a package or do laundry. I see the locked door at the end of the hallway and feel my stomach tense. But I haven't left yet. I guess a part of me still wants to see what's behind that wall, or who's standing in that corridor watching. Another part of me is terrified of what I might find. For now, I keep quiet. I still have the footage on my laptop, though I haven't shown it to anyone. It's my reminder that something is seriously off in this place. Maybe one day I'll find the courage to go down again, or maybe the caretaker will slip up and reveal more about what's hidden there. Until then, I live with the tension, the memories of that heavy stare, and the shape I saw in the darkness. I wish I could tell you there's a logical explanation. I wish I could say it was all in my head, but I felt a presence in that corridor, and I saw that figure vanish into thin air. The caretaker knows something, and he's not talking. That's all I have. Half-baked evidence, a shaky video, and a gut feeling that won't go away. It's enough to keep me from sleeping soundly. It's enough to make me glance over my shoulder anytime I hear a faint noise at night. I'm not sure if I'll ever get real answers, but I can't forget what I saw down there, no matter how hard I try. I remember the exact morning my neighbor ran out of his place like he was late for the most important event of his life. He slammed his door behind him. He held a small leather bag under his arm. He had a paint-stained shirt on, and there were streaks of dried pigment on his forearms. I watched him from my own doorway. He didn't make eye contact with me. He didn't say goodbye. He just disappeared down the hallway, his footsteps echoing against the worn-out tiles. I never saw him again after that. My name is Eric. I live in a small apartment on the 5th floor of an old building. The place creaks and moans on windy nights. Sometimes the power goes out, and sometimes the water runs cold. But it's cheap, and I'm used to it. The neighbor, I'll call him Mr. Harris, even though I never heard him say his own name, had been living next door for about 8 months. He rarely spoke. He nodded at me in the hallway sometimes. Other times, he kept his eyes on the ground and walked past quickly. I always knew he was some kind of artist because I'd catch glimpses of him carrying canvases or unwrapping brushes by the building's mailboxes. He never invited me in. I never asked. I figured it wasn't my business, but I had a curiosity about him. He moved like someone who saw things differently. I noticed his clothes were always stained with paint or charcoal. He didn't seem to mind it at all. So that morning, when he rushed out and didn't come back, I felt a little unsettled. For a day or two, I assumed he had gone on a trip or maybe to an art exhibit. But he never returned, and his door stayed unlocked. It bothered me. I couldn't ignore it. A few days later, late at night, I saw something through his window. The building's layout is a bit strange, and from the side window in my living room I can see part of his apartment if his curtains aren't drawn. That night his curtains were half open. I noticed a large canvas in his living room area, bigger than any I'd seen him carry before. It was propped up on an easel. The painting looked unfinished, but the colors were dark. I squinted, trying to see details. I could make out a shape, something like a robed figure or a person wearing a hood, standing against a night sky. It gave me a weird feeling, like I was intruding on something private. The next morning I walked by his door. It was unlocked. I paused with my hand hovering near the doorknob. I felt my heart start to pound. I told myself I was just concerned. What if something happened to him? What if he was hurt or missing? I stepped inside. I noticed the faint smell of paint and something like turpentine. The place was quiet. No one was there. His apartment looked ordinary enough, except for the large studio space in the living room. There were drop cloths spread across the floor. There were tubes of oil paint and dirty brushes scattered around. A wooden stand in the corner held a few half-used bottles of linseed oil and a couple of sketchbooks. The big canvas I'd seen through the window was right in front of me now. The painting showed a dark forest scene at night, with a single figure wearing a hooded cloak in the center. The figure stood near a barren tree. It looked almost like it was leaning forward, but there was no face visible. It was just shadows under that hood. The edges of the canvas were unpainted. The figure lacked detail in the hands and the lower half of the body. The background was mostly shades of deep blue and black. The brush strokes were thick and uneven, like someone had been working fast or working under pressure. The paint on the palette was still wet. The brushes on the table looked like they'd been dropped there in a hurry. I touched one of them. It was damp with oil paint. I felt uneasy. I wondered why Mr. Harris would leave such a big project unfinished. The painting looked important, like it was meant to be his grand piece. Yet he was gone. I looked around for any signs of him. I checked the small kitchen. Plates and cups sat on the counter, unwashed. The bathroom light was off and everything looked normal in there. His bedroom door was open, but there wasn't much to see. A bare mattress, a pile of clothes, a single lamp on the floor. Then I returned to the living room and stood in front of the painting again. My pulse was a little high. I heard my own breathing. I didn't like the way the hooded figure seemed to stare at me, even though it didn't have eyes. I reached out and touched the corner of the canvas with my fingertips. The paint was sticky. It left a smudge of deep blue on my skin. I left the apartment and locked it from inside. I felt weird doing that, but I didn't want someone else wandering in. I kept his key from the inside lock, which felt wrong, but I didn't see any other option. I told myself I'd keep it safe until Mr. Harris returned. That night, I made myself a simple dinner. I tried to distract myself by watching some old action movie on TV. My thoughts kept drifting to that painting and the hooded figure. I felt a tightness in my chest. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. But at around midnight, I turned off my lights and got ready for bed. Then I saw a faint glow through my living room window. I stopped moving. I noticed the light coming from Mr. Harris's apartment. It was a soft glow, like a single lamp. I thought maybe he had come back, but that didn't make sense. Why wouldn't he knock on my door? He had no reason to hide from me. I peeked through the window. From the angle of my view, I couldn't see the entire living room, only part of it. But I could definitely see the easel. The light source seemed to be in that area. I watched for a minute. My heart started to race again. I heard a faint sound that reminded me of bristles on canvas. It was that soft, rhythmic scrape of a brush against wet paint. I felt sweat on my forehead. I called out once quietly, even though I knew he couldn't hear me through the glass. I felt silly. I waited another minute, but the sound continued. It had a pattern to it. I'd hear a brush stroke, then a pause. Another brush stroke, then another pause. It went on for maybe 2 more minutes, and then the light went out. The next morning, I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but part of me wanted to see if the painting had changed. I used the key I'd taken, which I still felt guilty about, and slipped back into his apartment. Everything looked the same at first. I walked up to the easel, and my stomach sank. The figure in the painting had changed. It had more detail around the hood. There were traces of shading where the face would be, but it still looked hidden. The tree in the background had more branches now too, like someone had extended them. I rubbed my eyes. I couldn't believe it. The paint looked fresh. I bent down and smelled it. That strong smell of linseed oil and fresh pigments hit me. There were new streaks of color that I'd swear weren't there the day before. I looked around the apartment. There were no footprints or signs of anyone else coming in. For the next few nights, I kept seeing that same light. I heard those same brushstrokes. It happened at random hours. Sometimes it started around 10, sometimes closer to 2 in the morning. Each time, I'd feel a rush of adrenaline, and I'd freeze in place. My gut would tighten. My skin would break into a cold sweat. I'd stare out my window, waiting for the light to vanish. It always did. After a few nights of this, I couldn't sleep well. My eyes would snap open at the slightest noise. My arms felt weak and my stomach churned whenever I thought about that painting. On the 5th night, I tried to stay awake on purpose, hoping I'd catch whoever was sneaking into Mr. Harris's place. I sat in my living room with the lights off, staring through the window. Around midnight, the light in Mr. Harris's place flicked on. I saw a faint silhouette moving around. It looked like a person standing at the easel. I couldn't make out distinct features, but it had a shape like a tall figure leaning over the canvas. Then I heard the brush again. It was steady, like someone was applying careful strokes. I felt my heart thudding. My palms were sweating. I wanted to rush over there, but I couldn't move. My legs felt anchored. I just watched, feeling trapped in my own fear. After a few minutes, the silhouette paused. It seemed to turn in my direction, though I couldn't see a face. I held my breath. The light went off again and the figure vanished. The next morning, I forced myself to check the painting. I didn't want to, but I had to know. The door was still locked from the inside. I unlocked it and stepped in. The painting was different again. Now the figure had something like eyes. They were just 2 painted circles of a dull, reflective color, but they looked bright under the apartment's overhead light. They seemed to watch me when I moved around the room. The details of the cloak looked sharper. I ran my hand over the surface. The paint felt wet in certain spots. I stood there, shaking a bit, trying to piece things together. There was no sign of Mr. Harris. His clothes still lay in the same pile in his bedroom. Nothing else in the apartment looked touched. Only that painting had changed. That's when I realized I wasn't just uncomfortable. I was scared. My chest felt tight, and I had trouble swallowing. I left the apartment and locked it again. I tried to go about my day, but I couldn't focus on anything. My thoughts kept jumping back to that canvas, those new brush strokes, and those eyes. I went to a cafe to clear my head. I stared at my coffee cup, feeling the heat against my palms. People around me chatted, laughed, went about their business. I felt disconnected. That night, I decided to record everything with my phone. I set up my phone on a tripod near my window, pointing it directly at Mr. Harris's apartment. I sat in the dark, waiting for the light to appear. Around 1 a.m., it happened. The lamp, or whatever it was, flicked on, and I saw a shadowy figure working on the painting. I tried to zoom in with my phone, but the figure's details were blurry. I felt my entire body tense. I had a slow, crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I watched for about 10 minutes. Then the light went out. I rushed to check my phone. I played back the footage, but it was just darkness and a barely visible outline of movement. It looked like a glitch. The figure was too dark. The camera couldn't capture a clear shape. My frustration turned into deeper anxiety. I replayed it multiple times, but I got nothing useful. I told myself I'd go over there right at that moment, but my own fear stopped me. I was sweating. My breath was shaky. I didn't want to face that thing alone, whatever it was. So I waited until sunrise. When the sun came up, I grabbed the key and headed next door. I stood in front of the painting. My stomach clenched. The hooded figure had become almost lifelike. I could see folds in the cloak. The eyes were more defined, with a faint glimmer that made them look damp or glossy. There were subtle details on the hands now. They were long, with fingers slightly curled, though still somewhat blended with the background. The tree behind the figure had more branches, and they twisted in unnatural angles that made me feel queasy just looking at them. I heard a slight creak from somewhere in the apartment. I spun around, heart pounding. No one was there. I touched the painting. It was wet again. My fingers came away smeared with a dark color, maybe black or a very deep purple. I noticed fresh brushstrokes on the easel frame, like someone had rested their brush against it. I stood there, hearing my pulse in my ears. I decided I had to do something. I couldn't just let this keep happening. So I grabbed a sheet from the couch and threw it over the painting, covering it. I tried to calm down. My breath was shallow, and I had to force myself to breathe more slowly. Back in my apartment, I felt a slight relief at first, like covering the painting would stop whatever was going on. But that night, the light appeared again. It was bright, as if someone had turned on every lamp in the room. I heard an even louder sound, like a brush hitting canvas in strong, fast strokes. I looked through the window. The sheet I'd thrown over the painting was lying on the floor, crumpled. I paced around my living room. My shoulders were tense. My feet were restless. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That a ghost was painting next door? That my missing neighbor's artwork was finishing itself? I sat on my couch, hands clenched into fists, waiting for something else to happen. When I finally looked through the window again, the light was off. I stayed up until dawn. Then I went back next door, almost shaking with fear. The painting was uncovered, and now the figure had clear outlines for a face. I couldn't see features like a nose or mouth, but the skin tones were there, shading in the cheeks and forehead. The eyes looked wide, as if they'd been staring at something terrifying. They had a glossy finish that seemed to catch the morning light in a strange way. My throat tightened. I thought about taking the painting out of the apartment. Maybe I could hide it in the basement or trash it. But I remembered the instructions on the building's lease about disposing of large items. Also, a wave of nausea hit me when I imagined handling that canvas alone. My arms felt weak. I felt dizzy. At that point, I started hearing faint noises even during the day. A brush tapping against something, a quiet shuffle of footsteps on the drop cloth. Each time I heard it, I'd freeze. My heart would hammer in my chest. I'd stand there, listening. Then I'd force myself to move around, to check if it was coming from outside. But every time I'd find nothing. My paranoia grew. I stopped going to work. I made excuses over the phone. My boss seemed annoyed, but I couldn't think straight. I stayed in my apartment, trying to watch the neighbor's place at all hours. Sometimes I'd see the light flash for just a second, then go dark. Sometimes I'd catch a brief glimpse of that shape inside. It was always near the easel. The painting kept getting more detailed each day. The hood was now lined with a silver trim. The figure's hands looked almost real. The tree had small details in the bark, and the background had new elements like distant lights or stars. I'd find myself standing in front of it, chest tight, breath shaky, staring at how the image expanded. My biggest fear now is that it will be finished soon. I have this creeping sense that once the painting is complete, something will come out of it, or something will emerge in the apartment. I don't have any grand explanation or poetic way to put it. I just feel it in my body. My arms tense up when I think about it. My mouth goes dry. My head hurts. I've been trying to pull myself together long enough to decide what to do. Part of me wants to destroy the painting, rip it apart. Part of me is afraid that will make things worse. My mind starts racing with questions. What if it's the only thing holding something back? What if I'm unleashing something by touching it? Then I think I sound crazy, but every night those lights come back. I hear the brush. I see the strokes. The figure gets more defined, and I can't seem to do anything about it. I'm sitting at my small kitchen table now, writing this down on a notepad before I type it up later, because my hands are shaking and I need to focus. Every so often I look out my living room window. It's dark in Mr. Harris's place right now, but I'm waiting for that glow. My stomach is knotted. I'm sweating even though it's cold in here. If the figure in that painting gains a full face, I don't know what will happen. I don't know if I'll be able to live here anymore. I don't know if I'll see Mr. Harris again. At this point, I don't even want to. I just want the noises to stop, and I want that image to stay incomplete. Because if it doesn't, I have this crawling fear that something a lot worse is going to take form. And I can't handle that thought right now. So I'm waiting. I'm waiting to see if tonight is the night that painting finishes itself. And I'm terrified. I can't stop looking through the window, and I can't bring myself to walk away. I opened my eyes in the middle of the night because I heard a loud, clear bell ring. It sounded old, like something that might hang in a small country chapel. The sound hit me hard. My chest tightened, and my heart started beating faster. I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the bell echo across the walls. My head felt heavy, but I sat up, trying to figure out if I was dreaming. The ringing didn't stop when I rubbed my eyes. It kept going at an odd rhythm. There was a moment of silence, then another series of chimes. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stood. I was alone in the house, and I had no reason to expect any visitors. Still, I grabbed my phone from the bedside table and clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, showing the dresser, the closet door, and the small lamp by my bed. No movement, no objects that could produce a sound like that. I headed out into the hallway. My house is small, so it doesn't take long to walk from one end to the other. I took a few careful steps, checking each room one by one. The bell rang again, but it seemed to be coming from the living room. I turned left and walked toward that sound, shining my flashlight on the walls. Nothing was out of place. When I reached the living room, I aimed the light around, trying to spot any metal object. There was the coffee table, the TV, the shelf with some books, and a few empty glass bottles from the night before. No bell, no hanging ornaments. Then I heard it again, a little fainter, maybe in the kitchen. I paused and listened. My breathing was uneven, and I could feel sweat forming on the back of my neck even though the air was cool. I moved to the kitchen doorway and scanned the counters. Plates from dinner were stacked in the sink, some crumbs on the countertop. The faucet was off. My fridge hummed quietly, but that wasn't the sound. The bell chimed once more, this time from the direction of my bedroom, or so it seemed. It didn't make sense. I had just been in there. The echo was confusing. I walked back, checking corners with my flashlight. Each time I reached the spot where I thought the bell would be, it seemed to shift to another room. After about 15 minutes of this, I started getting frustrated. My mouth felt dry, and I realized I was panting a little, like I had been running. My stomach churned. I thought about going outside to see if maybe it was coming from the street or a neighbor's yard. But before I could do that, the ringing stopped altogether. The house went quiet. So quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood in the hallway, feeling my pulse throb in my temples. I took a breath and decided to check on my bedroom once more. There was a sense of relief that it was over, but my body felt tight, like I was preparing for something else to happen. I walked down the hallway, opened the bedroom door, and aimed the flashlight at the walls. That's when I saw them. Marks on the walls, large circles with a patchy orange color. They looked like rust or old metal residue. I blinked, trying to recall if I had ever noticed them. I was pretty sure they weren't there before. I stepped closer, rubbing my finger on one of the circles. A flaky substance came off, leaving a faint stain on my skin. I stared at my finger, then looked up at the ceiling. More circles were up there, spaced out, as if something round had been touching the surface. I ran my palm over my arm, trying to push away the goosebumps. I felt my stomach twist. I checked the rest of the room. The bed looked the same as usual. The closet door was shut. The windows were locked. But these circle marks were unsettling. They didn't look like regular stains or mold. They looked intentional, as if pressed onto the surface with some force. I felt my eyes darting around, hoping to see anything that would explain it. But there was nothing obvious to blame. The idea of that bell still buzzed in my head. I tried to calm myself by taking a few steady breaths. I told myself I'd check the time. It was a little after 3 in the morning. I tried to get some rest after that, but I kept glancing at the walls. The circles seemed more noticeable every time I looked at them. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I dozed off. When I woke again, it was late morning, and daylight was creeping through the blinds. The first thing I did was check the walls. The circles were still there, but in the sunlight they looked less shocking, almost faded. I touched them again, but nothing came off this time. I went about my day in a distracted way. I had a quick breakfast, turned on the TV for background noise, and kept thinking about the sound of that bell. By noon, I felt silly. There was no bell in the house, and I'd never kept anything that could produce such a strong ringing. I considered that maybe I was half asleep and imagined it, but the circles in my room were real. I even looked around the rest of the house for similar marks. I found a few on the hallway walls, small and faint, but clearly the same shape. I opened the closets, checked under furniture, even peeked into the attic. Nothing turned up. That night I had trouble falling asleep. I stayed up watching TV shows, letting the noise distract me from the memory of the bell. Around midnight, the place was quiet, and I felt my eyes getting heavy. I turned off the lights in the living room and walked to my bedroom. Right when I set foot inside, I heard that same bell again. A single, sharp ring that sent a jolt through my body. I froze. My heart pounded. I listened, waiting for another ring. It came a few seconds later, echoing in the hallway. I stepped back into the hall, my legs shaky, my hands clenched, but I couldn't see anything. The darkness felt thick. I turned on the hallway light. The bulb buzzed as it lit up. I looked at the walls. More circles. They were scattered across the hallway, bigger than before, darker. The orange-brown color looked fresh, like newly exposed rust. I walked up to one circle and placed my hand on it. The surface felt rough. I pulled my hand away and saw rust-colored flakes on my palm. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I wiped my hand on my pants and stepped backward, not sure what to do. The bell rang again, twice, from the living room. I turned my head in that direction, trying to steady my thoughts. I just wanted to know what was causing it. I moved slowly, passing more of those marks on the walls. My shoulders felt tense, and my teeth were clenched so hard it hurt. When I reached the living room, the bell went quiet again. I flicked the switch on the wall, and the overhead light revealed something new. Circles on the ceiling, circles near the windows, and even one on the outside of a kitchen cabinet door. They all shared that rusted color, and each was about the same size, roughly the diameter of a small bowl. I crouched by one and squinted at it. The surface looked thin but solid, like someone had pressed a metal ring against the wall. I spent hours awake that night, pacing around, checking every corner. The bell would chime every now and then, at random intervals. Sometimes it sounded close, other times distant. Each time it rang, I felt a rush of cold in my chest and a prickle on the back of my neck. I tried to call a friend to ask if they could hear it too, but I got their voicemail. I considered leaving the house, but I was afraid if I stepped outside, I'd find more of those marks out there, or maybe hear the bell in the street. Eventually, the sound stopped around 4 in the morning, and I must have fallen asleep on the living room couch because I woke up to daylight streaming in through the blinds. My neck was stiff, and I felt groggy. The circles were still there, and I hated looking at them. They felt wrong, like a sign of something I couldn't understand. I cleaned up a bit, got dressed, and tried to head to work. On my way out, I paused at the front door, half expecting to hear a bell behind me. But nothing happened, so I locked up and left. At work, I couldn't focus on my tasks. I replayed the events in my head, over and over, trying to come up with a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a weird prank, or some type of resonance from a neighbor's property. The marks, though, I couldn't explain. My boss asked me if I was feeling okay because I was zoning out and looked pale. I lied and said I was just tired. I avoided details. The last thing I wanted was to sound paranoid in front of my coworkers. I stayed out as late as I could that evening, grabbing dinner and browsing in a bookstore just to avoid going home. But I couldn't stay out forever, so eventually I drove back. The moment I unlocked the front door, I felt tension in my chest again. The house seemed darker than usual. I flipped on every light I could. I glanced around for new circles, but I didn't see any in the hallway. I crept to my bedroom and turned on the light there. The old circles were still visible, but nothing new. I exhaled, thinking maybe it had stopped. Then, when I went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, I heard a single chime from the corner of the room. It wasn't loud, but it made me jump. I dropped my glass and it shattered on the floor, water splashing everywhere. My heart was thudding like crazy. I stared at the corner, but nothing was there. Just the empty space near the trash can. I picked up the biggest shards of glass, then used a towel to soak up the water, feeling my hands tremble the entire time. I refused to stand in that corner, so I just reached over with the towel. That night, I stayed in the living room with the TV on low volume, my eyes on the windows and the walls. The bell rang a few times, sometimes close to me, sometimes sounding like it was in the bedroom. Each time I heard it, my mouth went dry and my pulse pounded in my neck. I began to notice that the circles were multiplying. I found new ones on the back of my couch, near the baseboards, and on the door frames. They had the same brownish-red tint. I touched one on the couch fabric, and it felt coarse, as if metal had scraped against it. The next morning, I decided to document everything. I took pictures of the marks with my phone. I recorded myself talking so I could note the times the bell rang. I even tried to capture the sound on my phone's microphone, but it never seemed to pick it up clearly. Sometimes it got a faint ring, but nothing that would convince someone else. I called a friend and asked them to come over that evening to keep me company, but they had other plans and couldn't make it. I didn't want to force it, so I said, "Never mind." I didn't mention the bell. That night, I heard the bell every 20 or 30 minutes, then sometimes twice in a row, then not at all for an hour. I lost track of the pattern, if there even was one. I felt drained, like this was chipping away at my sanity. At around 3 in the morning, I found myself standing in the hallway, glaring at the rust circles. They lined both sides of the hallway, spaced out in no clear order. They went up to the ceiling and disappeared near the edges. I pressed my ear to the wall, listening, but I just heard the faint hum of the wiring or pipes. I whispered to myself, telling whatever it was to leave me alone. The next few days followed the same pattern. The bell would ring whenever I was alone, and usually late at night. The circles seemed to grow in number, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, but always that same worn, rusty color. I could smell a faint metallic odor in the house at times, which made me feel queasy. I bought cleaning supplies and tried to scrub the marks away, but they only faded a tiny bit. A few hours later, they'd look fresh again. I started to dread being inside my own home. I'd stay out, visit a bar, sit in my car, or just walk around the neighborhood, not really going anywhere. But I couldn't escape that moment when I had to come back. Each time I put the key in the lock, my body tensed up. I'd hold my breath, open the door, and listen. Sometimes I'd hear the bell right away. Other times I'd have to wait, but it always came eventually, like it was reminding me that I was never really alone. Tonight, I'm in my bedroom, writing this down to keep myself occupied. The marks are all around me, on the ceiling, on the walls, near the floor. My lamp is on, but it doesn't brighten the place much. The house is silent except for the faint buzz of electricity. My heart rate is fast and I can't relax. My back feels stiff. My shoulders ache. I keep looking at the door, expecting the bell to ring outside in the hallway. My phone is next to me, but I'm not sure who to call. I can't invite anyone over this late, and I doubt they'd understand. Even if they came, would they hear the bell? Would they see the circles spread across the house? Every so often, I get up and stand in the middle of the room, just waiting. My legs feel weak. My hands are clammy. I keep swallowing, trying to get rid of that lump in my throat. The memory of that first night won't leave me. I can still feel the weight of confusion I had when I walked from room to room, chasing a sound that moved faster than I could. I remember the shock of finding those marks on my walls, not knowing how they got there. I just heard a muffled chime coming from the living room, so I'm going to go check. My stomach is in knots. I wish I could ignore it, but that's almost impossible. I have to look, even though I know I won't find anything. Because if I don't look, I'll just sit here staring at the door, feeling the sweat roll down my temple. I'll start imagining shapes in the shadows, and that's somehow worse. I'm not sure how much longer I can live like this, waiting for that bell to reveal itself. The tension in my head feels constant, and I've been getting headaches. Every time I close my eyes, I see those rust-colored circles in the darkness. Whenever I'm alone, I hear that old bell ring. It never follows a normal schedule. It's never something I can predict. It just happens, and I feel my body react in the same way every time. A jerk of surprise, a surge of dread, and then a cold sweat. I'm going to stand up now and walk into the living room. If the bell rings again, I'll try to record it. My phone is charged, and I'll set it to video. I want proof for myself. Maybe if I see nothing on the footage, it'll give me a clue. Or maybe it'll just confirm that I'm stuck in this house, with something that keeps announcing its presence. Sometimes I wonder if, one day, I'll turn around and see the bell itself, rusted and worn, floating in the middle of the room. But I don't let that thought go too far, because my chest tightens even more, and my breathing gets too quick. For now, I can only keep moving, keep my eyes open, and wait for the next ring. The house is quiet as I walk. My footsteps sound too loud on the floor. The bell hasn't chimed again yet, but I can feel that tightness, like it's about to. I glance at the walls, at the circles. They seem fresh again, bright orange at the edges. I step forward, phone in my hand, and I wait. I'm waiting to see what happens next, and part of me hopes it never comes. But I know it will. It always does. And when it does, I'll be here alone, with only the echo of that rusted sound to keep me company. I never expected to feel unsafe in my own bedroom. That dark stain on the wall near my bed didn't worry me much at first. It just looked like a small patch of discoloration, maybe from humidity or an old leak. But everything changed when I started hearing those soft voices. They sounded like a distant choir humming some slow melody, and they came from that exact spot. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Then I realized it was real. I felt my skin tighten when I pressed my ear against the wall and heard that low singing. I didn't tell anyone because it sounded too strange. Now I'm not sure who I can trust with this secret. Every time I focus on that melody, I feel a deep heaviness in my chest. And it's getting worse. My name is Daniel. I'm 32, and I live alone in this studio apartment. It's not fancy, but it's good enough for me. There's a small living area that connects to a kitchenette, a cramped bathroom, and a bedroom with barely enough space for a full bed. The walls are plain white, except for that one stain near my bed. The first time I noticed it, I assumed it was an old watermark. I didn't bother with it because the landlord never fixes anything unless it's an emergency. But a few weeks ago, I heard what sounded like a gentle tune in the middle of the night. I lifted my head from the pillow and listened. The noise was faint, like a breeze through a crack in the window, except there was a definite pattern to it. It was musical. I followed the sound to the wall behind my headboard. When I leaned closer, I heard a blend of voices, layered in a strange harmony. It felt like they were singing in a low register, humming words I couldn't understand. I turned on the lights and checked the wall. The dark patch was still there, maybe a bit larger than before, but I couldn't be certain. I didn't see any holes or cracks. I pressed my palm against it. The surface felt slightly colder than the rest of the wall. I listened again, but the voices faded. I tried to sleep, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that humming. The next morning, I woke up late and hurried out to work. During the day, I mostly forgot about the strange sound, but when I got home that evening, my curiosity came back. I went to my bedroom, put my ear to the wall, and waited. I heard nothing for a while. Then, just when I started to feel foolish, I caught the faint hum again. It was the same tune as before, a slow, steady melody. The voices were soft, but I could tell there were multiple tones blending together. I decided to record it on my phone. I kept as silent as possible and placed the phone against the wall. When I played back the recording, I barely heard anything. My microphone didn't pick up much, just a low rumble. I replayed it over and over, straining to catch the melody. It was there, but distorted. I plugged in my headphones, turned up the volume, and that helped a little. I heard the layered voices again, but it sounded distant and hollow. I felt a sharp tension in my neck and shoulders. Something about that recording made me uneasy. I tried to ignore it. For the next couple of days, I went about my routine. I work in tech support for a small company, and it's not stressful, but it's repetitive. I often feel drained by the end of the day, and I just watch TV or read. But the stain kept getting my attention, especially at night. I noticed that whenever I listened to that humming for too long, my heart would pound harder. I wasn't sure if it was fear or just a stress response. I also started noticing that the stain looked different at certain times. One night I was sure I saw it ripple when the humming grew louder. I was so startled that I jumped away from the wall. My breathing got fast, and I had to leave the room for a while. I started writing down bits of the melody when I could. I tried to capture the notes in a small notebook. I'm not a musician, but I know enough to write approximate pitches. It was rough, and I couldn't always separate the layers, but I did my best. Sometimes I'd hum a fragment out loud to see if I was getting it right. I noticed that whenever I did that, my chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. I also felt a strange stirring in my stomach. It was like the melody was pulling something out of me, but I still kept writing it down. I had this urge to figure it out. It felt almost like a puzzle I needed to solve, even though it made me anxious. One evening, I tried to replicate a longer section of the melody by playing it on my old keyboard. It wasn't a great keyboard, just something I kept from high school. I plugged it in, powered it on, and tried the notes I had written. I made a lot of mistakes, but eventually I got a sequence that sounded similar. As soon as I played it correctly, I felt a pressure behind my eyes. My vision blurred for a second. My hands started shaking, and I made a bunch of errors on the keys. I cursed under my breath and stopped. Then I turned to look at the wall behind me. The stain looked bigger. I'm not sure if it actually grew right then, or if my mind was just reacting, but it looked darker and wider across the plaster. I got up from the keyboard, went to the kitchen, and grabbed a glass of water. My hands were still shaking. I felt sweat collecting at my temples. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept hearing the tune in my head. My dreams were restless, just me standing in front of that wall while a group of invisible people hummed around me. When I woke up, I felt drained. I dragged myself out of bed, stared at the stain, and promised myself I'd ignore it. I went to the bathroom, showered, and tried to pretend the day was normal. But deep down, I knew something was off. The hush in the apartment felt too thick. I left for work, hoping that being around other people would ease my mind. It helped a little, but I still caught myself humming pieces of that tune without thinking about it. A coworker asked what I was humming. I said I didn't know. I just laughed it off, but inside I felt uneasy. That evening, I got home and the apartment was dark. The hallway light was out, so I fumbled with my keys for a bit. I stepped inside, flipped on the overhead light, and dropped my bag near the door. I felt a slight chill in the air. I thought maybe the landlord messed with the thermostat again. I walked to the bedroom. The moment I walked in, I heard the hum right away. It was louder than before. I stopped in my tracks and stared at the wall. My chest tightened. I turned on the bedside lamp. The stain looked swollen, like a wet patch that was about to burst. The edges were uneven, and the center was almost black. I swallowed hard and took a step closer. The humming was steady, a slow drone. I forced myself to touch the wall. It felt ice cold, and my fingertips tingled. I jerked my hand back. My breathing got shallow. My heart pounded. I left the room and went to sit on the couch in the living area. I sat there for a while trying to calm down. My leg wouldn't stop bouncing, and I kept rubbing my hands together. I considered calling someone to come over, maybe a friend, but I felt embarrassed. What would I say? There's a weird stain on my wall that sings at night? That sounds ridiculous. I looked at my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and put it down. I stayed there until I got hungry. I made some quick dinner, just a microwave meal. I tried to watch something on TV, but I couldn't focus. Every time there was a quiet moment, I heard the humming again. It bled through the walls, barely audible, but enough to keep me on edge. After I ate, I gathered my notes and tried to piece together more of the melody. I was determined to understand it. A part of me believed that if I could figure it out, maybe I could stop it. But as I studied the notes, my vision blurred. My eyes felt heavy. My head started throbbing. I pushed through it. I sang a few measures softly, then stopped to catch my breath. My chest felt like someone had pressed a heavy block against it. I got up and paced around the living area. My thoughts raced. I kept looking at the bedroom door, half expecting something to step out of the darkness. I didn't see anything, but the tension in my shoulders wouldn't go away. I decided to sleep on the couch. I turned off the lights, lay down, and closed my eyes. The fabric was scratchy, and the cushions sank under my weight. I tried not to think about the stain, but the humming echoed in my head. I felt a tremor in my hands. My breathing got shallow again. After a while, I fell asleep out of exhaustion. I woke up a few hours later in a sweat. The humming was louder than ever. I shot up and checked my phone. It was around 3 in the morning. My heart raced. I walked to the bedroom door. The humming didn't fade. I stepped inside. The stain looked like it was pulsing. I turned on the light. There was a slight vibration under my feet. I tried to keep my hand steady as I touched the wall. It was cold, but felt like it was moving under my palm. I felt nauseous. I backed away and sat on the bed. I stared at that stain, not sure what to do. I thought about painting over it, but that didn't feel like it would solve anything. The melody changed a little. It rose in pitch, then went back down. I covered my ears, but that didn't stop the sound. I felt this urgent panic in my chest. My breathing got ragged. My pulse hammered so hard that I worried I'd faint. I kept thinking something was going to come through that wall. I ran out of the room and grabbed my phone off the couch. I wanted to call the landlord, but it was 3 in the morning. He wouldn't answer. I paced around the kitchen, feeling lost. The humming vibrated through the entire apartment now. I thought about leaving, but where would I go? I had work the next day, and I didn't have money for a hotel. I tried to calm myself. I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked pale, with dark circles under my eyes. My hair was a mess. My shirt was sticking to my back with sweat. I took deep breaths and forced myself to go back to the bedroom. I sat on the bed again and tried to focus on the physical space. My nightstand was cluttered with old receipts and a lamp. My bedspread was wrinkled, and a pair of socks lay on the floor. The overhead light was dim. I could see dust on the edges of the baseboard. The stain was still there, dark and wet-looking. The humming was constant now. I felt trapped by it. My head started throbbing again. My pulse was in my ears. I opened my notebook and looked at the melody I had written. I started to see patterns in the notes. It was like a code. I tried to hum the full sequence. A twisting pain spread through my chest. I clenched my jaw and kept going. My forehead was damp with sweat. The stain seemed to shift, like the edges were curling in. I coughed and nearly dropped the notebook. My lungs felt tight. I stopped humming and gasped for air. My vision spun. I laid down on the bed for a few minutes. The humming died down slightly, but it didn't stop. My mind raced. I realized the more of the melody I pieced together, the stronger the stain became. It felt like the apartment itself was reacting to the music. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand. I felt clammy. I decided that I had to stop. I couldn't keep searching for those notes. I couldn't let myself learn the entire song. If I did, I was sure something would force its way out of the wall. The thought of that made my stomach lurch. I rolled onto my side and tried to block out the sound. I think I drifted off to sleep again, because the next thing I knew, my phone alarm was ringing. In the morning, I got up and rushed to take a shower. I felt stiff, my neck hurt. I tried to block out the memory of the night. The bedroom was quiet now. The stain was still there, but it seemed smaller in the daylight. I told myself to go to work and act normal. That's what I did. I worked my shift, tried to concentrate, but my thoughts kept going back to the stain. I dreaded going home, but I had no other place to go. After work, I lingered around the office, checking emails I didn't care about. I ate a sandwich at a nearby cafe. Eventually, I had to leave. When I got home, I stood outside my door for a minute. The hallway light was still out, so I fumbled with my keys again. I walked in and felt that same chill. I flicked on the lights. Everything was quiet. I dropped my bag. My heart pounded with each step toward the bedroom. My ears strained for that singing, but I heard nothing. The stain was still on the wall, dark and uneven, but it wasn't humming. I felt relief, but also fear. I wondered if it was just waiting for me to let my guard down. Now I'm sitting here, writing this all down. My hands are shaking a bit. I can't fully relax. I keep glancing at the wall. The stain looks the same, but I can't trust it. I know that humming will come back. I know I can't finish that melody. If I do, I might lose myself. It hurts to admit it, but I'm scared. I can handle a lot of things, but this is different. It's inside these walls, it's inside my mind when I'm asleep. I can't run away from it without leaving my entire life behind. So, for now, I'm staying. I won't keep working on the melody. I'll try to ignore the humming if I hear it again. If it gets worse, I might have to move out. But that might be complicated. My lease isn't up for another 6 months, and I'm short on money. I don't know how this will play out. But I'm writing this down because I need to remember how it feels. I need to remember that I can't let it get to me. I won't become some tool for whatever is behind that wall. I won't be an instrument. For now, I'm just waiting, listening, and trying to stay sane. I moved into this apartment a few months ago because the rent was lower than most places in the area. The layout seemed ordinary enough, except for one strange detail. There's a long corridor lined with mirrors on both sides. When I first walked through it, I thought it looked like a fun house. The mirrors go from floor to ceiling, and they're placed in such a way that my reflection repeats over and over as I move. I remember feeling a bit uneasy, but I told myself it was just an odd design choice. I signed the lease thinking I'd get used to it. The first few weeks I barely noticed the mirrors. I worked late hours, so I usually got home exhausted. I'd walk through the corridor without paying much attention, then collapse on my bed. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of myself from the corner of my eye, and I felt that slight jolt of confusion people get when they see unexpected movement. But I brushed it off. I told myself it was just me reacting to my own reflection. One night it was especially cold. The heating in the building can be erratic, and I remember feeling a chill on my skin as I took off my jacket. I tossed it onto the couch in the living room, then walked toward my bedroom. That's when I noticed the mirrors looked foggy. At first I thought maybe I was breathing out warm air, but I wasn't. I held my breath and looked closely. All of them had a thin layer of mist at the same time. There was no shower running, no boiling pot on the stove, no open windows letting in humid air. I stood there, staring at the mirrors, trying to figure out what was causing this fog. Then I saw some faint shapes in the haze. They looked like simple markings at first, but the edges were too defined to be random smudges. I stepped closer. The lines started to resemble intricate patterns, almost tribal in style, but I couldn't see them clearly. My eyes felt strained. Each time I blinked, the shapes seemed to vanish, only to shift into a new position when I opened my eyes again. I stood there for a good few minutes, trying to catch one of these patterns before it disappeared. My heart started racing, and I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I wiped it away, but I didn't feel any heat. I was cold, but my body reacted with sweat anyway. I reached out to touch the mirror, thinking I could wipe off the fog with my sleeve. As soon as my fingers touched the surface, I felt a slight resistance. It was like pushing against a thin layer of thick ice. The mirror wasn't actually frozen, but it didn't feel like simple condensation. My fingertips didn't slide easily. When I pressed harder, I felt my nails scraping against something solid, even though it looked like ordinary glass. That made me recoil. I jerked my hand back, my pulse thumping. I didn't want to try again. Instead, I backed away and went to my bedroom, feeling like I was being watched from behind. That night, I had the first of many disturbing dreams. In it, I was standing in a dense fog, unable to see anything more than a foot in front of me. My skin felt damp, and the air around me was cold. I started walking, but the ground felt like I was stepping on wet concrete. Then I saw shadows. They were shaped like arms, but they had no bodies attached. Just these forearms with hands reaching out of the fog, grabbing at the air. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, like I was wading through thick slush. The hands got closer and started brushing against my arms and shoulders. I remember feeling a real jolt of panic in my chest. My breathing was fast, and my throat felt tight. Right when one hand closed around my wrist, I woke up drenched in sweat. It was still dark. My sheets were twisted around my body. My chest hurt from how hard my heart was pounding. It took me a few minutes to calm down enough to breathe normally. The next morning, I walked through the corridor again. This time, the mirrors were clear. They looked perfectly normal, and if I hadn't experienced that strange fog the night before, I would have thought it was just a bad dream. But later that same day, as soon as the sun went down, I checked the corridor again. The mirrors were clouded in patches. Different spots of mist had formed, and I saw more of those faint patterns. They were different from the night before, but they had the same style of looping lines and curved shapes. I felt a chill slip down my spine. I tried to talk myself out of panicking. I told myself it might be some weird condensation effect, maybe temperature differences in the building, but there was no rational explanation for these precise patterns. They shifted too fast, fading in and out like living things. I tried cleaning the mirrors with a cloth and some glass cleaner. The cloth snagged on the surface like it was sticking to a rough spot. I applied more pressure, and I heard a scratching sound that made me cringe. My hand started to tremble. It felt like I was scraping a frozen windshield in the middle of winter. I stepped back and put the cloth down. I couldn't keep going. My stomach was in knots, and I realized my breathing had turned shallow. Over the next few nights, I started avoiding the corridor after dark. I would come home and rush straight to the bedroom with my gaze on the floor. But the problem was, I had to pass those mirrors to get anywhere in my apartment. I found myself imagining movement in my peripheral vision. Sometimes I looked up and caught my own reflection turning slightly too late or too early. It's hard to describe, but it felt like I was watching a person who was trying to mimic my movements, but not perfectly. My reflection's arm might lift a fraction of a second before mine, or I'd glance toward a mirror on the left, and I'd see my reflection's face still turned forward. Each time it happened, my skin prickled with goosebumps. I started losing sleep because of the nightmares. They got worse. Every dream had that same fog, those hands, and that feeling of being pulled. I'd wake up gasping for air, sometimes yelling. My voice was hoarse in the mornings, and my eyes looked sunken in the bathroom mirror. During the day, I considered calling a friend to talk about it, but I felt embarrassed. I didn't know how to explain that my corridor mirrors seemed alive or possessed. I thought about calling the landlord, but I doubted he would believe any of this. He'd probably say I was imagining things or ask if I had a humidity problem. About 2 weeks after this started, I decided to try something different. I went to a local hardware store and bought a small handheld steamer. My plan was to test if direct steam would make any difference or reveal something about the patterns. I waited until night. Around 11 p.m., I turned off all the lights in the corridor, leaving only a faint glow from the living room lamp. The mirrors had that usual patchy fog. My hands shook as I plugged in the steamer. The hallway was silent, except for the low hum of the appliance heating up. I approached the nearest mirror and held the nozzle close to the glass. Steam billowed out, adding another layer of mist. At first, I couldn't see anything unusual, but after a few seconds, I noticed tiny cracks or lines forming in the original fog. They spread out in a branching pattern. My heart started thumping because it looked like these lines were moving under the surface of the mirror. I jerked the steamer away, stumbled back, and fell onto the floor. I knocked over a small table behind me, sending a lamp crashing to the ground. The bulb shattered, and the hallway went dark. I scrambled for the light switch, my hands fumbling. When I finally switched it on, the corridor was bright again, and the mirror looked almost normal, just a bit steamed up. But those lines were gone. I picked myself up, feeling a rush of adrenaline pumping through my veins. My shoulders were stiff and my teeth were clenched. At that point, I started thinking about moving out, but I had put down a security deposit, and I didn't have the funds to break the lease without serious financial strain. I thought maybe I could just ignore it. I told myself that if I stayed away from the mirrors after dark, maybe I could pretend nothing was wrong. But the dreams didn't stop, and I still had to pass that corridor every day. 2 nights ago, I tried sleeping on the couch in the living room instead of my bedroom. I hoped that avoiding the corridor might give me some peace. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint sound, like a low scraping or scratching coming from the hallway. My body tensed up and I felt my skin turning clammy. I sat up and stared at the corridor entrance. It was dark, but I could see a slight sheen on the mirrors from the dim streetlight filtering through my window. My heart pounded in my ears. I didn't want to go in there, but I couldn't ignore that noise. I got up, took a few cautious steps, and stood at the threshold of the corridor. The scraping noise stopped. I looked at my reflection. I saw my own shape, but I also noticed a patch of fog near the center of the mirror on the right. It was shifting, forming lines. I stepped closer, wanting to see if it was another pattern. But then I noticed something else. My reflection's head turned to face me before I actually moved. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I saw my reflection raise its hand and press it against the glass, palm first, but I hadn't lifted my own hand at all. My arms were hanging at my sides. I felt a pulse of panic in my chest, and I stumbled backward. I fumbled for the living room light switch, flicking it on in a rush. Once the bright light hit the corridor, my reflection snapped back to normal, mirroring me exactly. The patch of fog was still there, but the pattern was less distinct. My heart was pounding, and I could hear my ragged breathing. My legs felt like they wanted to give out. I didn't go to work the next day. I was too shaken up. I sat around in the living room trying to think of a plan. I considered covering up the mirrors with sheets or newspaper, but the corridor is so long and the mirrors are so tall, I wasn't sure how to do that by myself. Still, I decided to try. I grabbed a roll of duct tape and an old sheet. I managed to cover maybe 2 panels before I felt something behind me, like a presence. I whipped around, but the corridor was empty, aside from my reflections. I realized my nerves were frayed, and I couldn't keep going alone. My chest felt tight and my fingers were trembling. I left the sheets where they were and retreated to the living room again. That's where I am now, telling this story. It's late, and I'm wide awake because I'm scared to sleep. I keep looking at the entrance to the corridor. Even though the lights are on, I see the mirrors shining in that unnatural way, like they have a thin layer of ice on them. My mouth is dry and my hands feel cold. Every little noise in the building, like the pipes or the distant hum of the elevator, makes me jump. I'm not sure what I should do next. Part of me wants to run out and never come back, but I can't afford that. I'm stuck here until I can figure out a real solution. I think about trying to break the mirrors, but that would cost me a fortune to replace, and I can't predict what might happen if I actually smash them. The idea of releasing something worse makes my stomach turn. For now, I'm just sitting here, keeping an eye on the corridor. My head hurts and I haven't eaten much. My nerves are shot. I keep remembering the feeling of my reflection moving on its own. That moment is burned into my mind, and I can't shake the image of its hand pressing against the glass while mine stayed down at my side. I feel powerless. Every time I think of walking through that corridor to get to my bedroom, my heart races, and I start breathing faster. I don't know if this is going to get worse or if it will just keep repeating each night. I'm afraid to find out, but I guess I have no choice. This apartment is all I have for now, and I can't break the lease without losing everything I saved. I'm going to try to block out the corridor entirely, maybe stack some furniture in front of it, or find a way to seal it off. I'm desperate to keep those mirrors out of my sight. I wish I could say this is some overactive imagination or a misunderstanding, but I know what I saw and felt. I felt that solid resistance when I tried to wipe the glass. I saw those shapes in the fog. I watched my reflection move without me, and I have no explanation. I can only hope that I can make it through the night without another nightmare, and without those mirrors calling out to me. That's all I can say right now. I'm just trying to stay calm, keep the lights on, and not look too long at any reflection I see. If something changes, I'll have to face it, but for the moment, I'm just going to sit here and stare at the corridor from a safe distance, waiting for morning. Maybe in the daylight it'll feel like none of this ever happened. But night always comes back, and I have a feeling those mirrors aren't finished with me yet. I always thought my old rotary phone was just a piece of junk. I found it at a flea market years ago. The beige plastic is cracked near the cord, and the rotary dial sticks if I move it too fast. I set it on a small table in my living room because I liked how it looked. It had no cord plugged into the wall, and it never had any line service. It was just a decoration, a relic from a different time. But about a month ago, things started happening that I can't explain. The phone rang in the middle of the night. At first I thought I was imagining it. I was half asleep and I heard a muffled ring that made my stomach churn. I looked over at my digital clock. It was around 2 a.m. I sat up in bed listening. The sound stopped, so I convinced myself it was a dream. The next night it happened again, closer to 3 a.m. The phone's ring wasn't sharp. It sounded distant, like it was coming through thick walls or from underwater. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I got out of bed, heart pounding. I walked into the living room. The phone sat there on its table. The handset was in place. Its plastic body looked dull in the faint light from the street lamp outside. When I picked up the receiver, I heard nothing at first. Then I caught a faint static. It was soft, more like a hum. I waited, my grip on the phone tight. No voice came. My mouth felt dry, so I put the phone back down and turned on all the lights in my apartment. I tried to tell myself that maybe there was some leftover wiring in the wall. Maybe the phone picked up interference from somewhere. But a few days later, the phone started ringing at exactly the same time every night, 2:47 a.m. I tried ignoring it, but it kept going. It didn't ring forever. It would ring 4 or 5 times, then stop. My nerves felt raw. I started waking up a few minutes before 2:47 a.m. so I could walk to the living room ahead of time. I'd stand in the dark, staring at that old phone, heart thumping in my ears. Then it would ring. I'd jump every time. My hands would shake when I reached for the receiver. Each time I heard static. Sometimes I heard faint clicks or a raspy sound that might have been breathing. I couldn't tell. After a week of this, I tried removing the phone. I took it down to the building's storage room. I left it in a dark corner behind a few boxes. I went back upstairs feeling relieved. The next night, I slept better. But 2 nights later, the ringing returned. I got out of bed, heart racing. I went to the living room and froze. The phone was on its little table again. It was plugged into a wall socket I never noticed before. The cord ran along the floor, and the end of the cord seemed to vanish behind the baseboard. I didn't understand how it got there. I knew I had carried it downstairs. My hands were shaking. I reached down, pulled the cord out of the wall, and lifted the phone. It felt cold. I put it in my closet behind a pile of old coats. I even locked the closet door. That night, the phone rang again at 2:47 a.m. I stepped into the living room and I saw the phone back on the table. The closet door was still locked, but the phone was out. I yanked the receiver off the cradle. Static roared in my ear. Then it faded into small crackles. My name came through, repeated in a low, scratchy tone. It was my name. over and over. I dropped the receiver. My knees felt weak. I ran back to my bedroom and shut the door. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, I forced myself to check the living room. The phone was there, same as before, but the cord was back out of the wall. It was just sitting on the table, silent. I wanted to throw it away, but I felt something pull me back. I was afraid, but I also felt compelled to keep it. I didn't feel possessed, I just felt drawn to it. I told myself it was a weird fixation. Maybe I wanted an explanation for something that made no sense. I set my alarm for 2:45 a.m. so I'd be ready. It became a routine. I'd wake up, wait by the phone, and pick it up on the first ring. Each time, I only heard static, faint whispers, or clicks. Sometimes I'd wait for a voice or a phrase. Sometimes I'd say, "Who is this?" or "What do you want?" But I never got a straight answer. There was a night when I heard breathing, slow and labored. I could hear my own breath, shaky with nerves. My heart pounded so hard that I felt it in my temples. I asked, "Hello? Can you hear me?" The only response was a soft whisper that I couldn't understand. I tried focusing on the sound, but it was too murky. I hung up and stared at the phone. My palms were sweaty and my mind was racing. I started losing sleep. I found myself nodding off at work. My boss asked if I was okay, and I made up some story about insomnia. I didn't tell anybody what was happening at home because it sounded ridiculous. I knew nobody would believe me. My friends might have joked about ghosts or curses, but I wasn't laughing. I felt uneasy all the time. My apartment seemed darker. Even during the day, I'd glance at the phone and worry about that upcoming night. I became short-tempered and restless. My coworkers noticed, but I brushed it off. After another week of this, I tried calling a phone company. I asked them if there was any chance a disconnected phone could ring because of stray signals. The guy on the phone said he'd never heard of that happening. He suggested it might be picking up radio frequencies, but that wouldn't explain the static or the whispers. He basically told me to toss the phone in the trash. I hung up, frustrated. I almost did it. I picked up the phone, walked toward my door, and then hesitated. I felt this tightness in my chest. I put the phone back on the table. I didn't understand why I couldn't get rid of it. Something in my mind told me I needed to answer tonight's call. That evening, I tried to stay calm. I had a small dinner, watched some TV, and tried not to fixate on the clock. I did push-ups in my living room to burn off nervous energy. I couldn't stop glancing at that phone, though. I felt antsy. My muscles were tense. Eventually, I got into bed around midnight, but I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for 2:47 a.m. When my clock turned 2:46 a.m., I got up. My heartbeat sped up. I walked to the living room and stood next to the phone. Right on time, it rang. 4 muffled rings. I lifted the receiver on the first ring. Static hissed, then fell quiet. I said, "I'm here. I can hear you." I heard a faint whisper. It sounded like my name again. My forehead felt damp with sweat. I forced myself to speak. "I'm listening. What do you want?" The static crackled louder. It rose and fell in waves, almost like it was trying to form words. I stood there for a full minute, clutching the handset. My entire body felt tense. Finally, a single word broke through, but it was garbled. I couldn't make it out. Then the line went dead. I stayed up the rest of the night staring at the phone. The next day, I disconnected every electronic in my apartment. I went around, unplugging my TV, my stereo, my lamps. The phone stayed silent during the daytime, but I wanted to remove any chance of interference. I even checked the walls for hidden jacks or cables. I found nothing. The night came, and I followed the same routine. Sure enough, the phone rang at 2:47 a.m. I snatched it off the cradle, holding my breath. The static was harsher this time, stinging my ear. I heard a faint mumbling. I said, "I can't hear you. Speak clearer." My voice shook. For a brief second, the static cleared, and I heard my name again, repeated over and over in a slow chant. My chest felt tight and my hands started trembling. I almost threw the receiver across the room. Instead, I hung up and stared at the phone, panting. My mind was buzzing with confusion. I felt terrified, but I also felt drawn in. I wanted to know what it meant. I started sleeping in the living room on the couch so I wouldn't miss the ring. I kept a small notebook on the coffee table, hoping to write down any words or phrases I caught. But most nights it was just static and whispers. Sometimes I heard a raspy laugh or a cough. Sometimes I heard a few syllables that sounded like part of my name, but then it faded. I wrote down random letters that I thought I heard, R, N, S, but none of it made sense. My apartment turned into a mess. I had coffee cups everywhere because I was always on edge, always tired. I barely ate. I'd snack on something quick, then wait for the next night. My routine started revolving around that phone call. I stopped seeing friends, canceled plans, ignored texts. I wanted answers. I felt like I was chasing some final bit of knowledge that was just out of reach. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked pale, with dark circles under my eyes. My clothes were wrinkled. I felt jumpy at every little noise. The hum of my fridge made me twitch. The creak of the floorboards made my heart pound. One night, I tried to speak more forcefully to whoever was on the other side. When the phone rang, I answered and said, "Stop calling me. Leave me alone." My voice cracked a bit, but I tried to sound angry. The static rose in intensity, like a growl. It built up, then abruptly cut out. The line went silent. I hung up, feeling a rush of victory. I thought I had scared it away. But the phone rang again a few seconds later, louder this time. I picked it up and hissed, "What do you want from me?" Static blasted my ear, so loud that I winced. Then I heard that same slow repetition of my name. It sounded closer than before, as if someone was speaking into my ear. I slammed the phone down. My hands were shaking. My entire body felt hot, like I was going to explode. I couldn't stand it, but I also couldn't let it go. Over the next week, the phone rang every night without fail. My sense of time became warped. I dreaded the night, but I also yearned for it. I'd catch myself counting the hours until 2:47 a.m. I'd pace around my living room, picking up the phone before it even rang, hoping to hear something. But the call only started at that exact minute. Never earlier, never later. When it rang, I'd answer. Sometimes I'd speak calmly, sometimes I'd shout, sometimes I'd beg for answers. All I ever got were these weird sounds, static, and occasionally, my name repeated in that horrible whisper. After each call, I'd feel spent and scared, but I couldn't stop. I wanted a breakthrough. I wanted it to speak in full sentences. I wanted to know what was happening to me. I even tried recording the calls on my phone's voice recorder. I set it next to the rotary phone and let it run during the call. The next day I played the recording back, but all I heard was faint static. No voice. No mention of my name. Even the ring itself didn't come through on the recording. It was as if it never happened. That made me feel isolated. I had no proof. Nobody else heard it. I was alone with this nightly horror show. Then, a few nights ago, something changed. The phone rang, I answered, and the static turned into a low hum. It pulsed in my ear, and I heard a long exhale. I said, "I'm here. I'm listening." My voice was shaky, but I tried to hold steady. The hum grew louder, and I heard a soft shuffle, like someone shifting in a chair. My scalp prickled. I waited for a voice. Instead, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My breath caught in my throat. My living room felt icy. I clutched the receiver tighter. Then I heard a slight scraping sound on the line, like nails on metal. My heart hammered in my chest. I opened my mouth to say something, but I couldn't. The line went dead. I stood there, panting, the phone still in my hand. After that, I decided to try one more time to get rid of it. I wrapped the phone in thick plastic bags. I taped them shut layer after layer. I sealed it with duct tape. I drove out of town, past some industrial lots, and I dumped the phone in a large dumpster behind an abandoned building. I left it there feeling like I was disposing of toxic waste. I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night I fell asleep early, hoping for peace. But at 2:47 a.m., I woke up to the same muffled ring. I bolted upright in bed. My chest felt tight. I ran to the living room and I saw the phone on the table, completely free of any plastic or tape. The handset was off the cradle, resting on the table, as if someone had already answered. The cord was plugged into the wall. I felt this surge of dread in my stomach, my head pounded. I picked up the receiver. Static rattled in my ear. I gasped. I can't take this anymore. My mouth felt dry, my voice shook. The static turned into a hiss, and I heard my name again, repeated. I hung up, stood there for a second, and then grabbed my cell phone. I don't even know who I meant to call. Maybe the police, maybe a friend. But I realized I had no way to explain this. I put my phone down and just stared at that cursed rotary phone. Now, I'm stuck. I keep waiting for 2:47 a.m. I know it's coming, every single night. I feel like I'm on the edge of some strange discovery, but I also feel like I'm losing control. My heart races when I think about the next call. My apartment feels smaller, the walls feel closer. I avoid going into the living room after dark, but I can't help myself when it's almost time. I creep in, my pulse thudding, and I wait for the ring. It always comes. I always answer. I don't know how to stop this. I can't explain it. And each night the static gets clearer. The whispers get bolder. Sometimes I swear I can hear my name echoing in my own ears even after I hang up. I don't know what will happen if I ignore the phone, and I don't know what will happen if I keep answering, but I can't help it. I pick up, every single time, and I feel that tension coil tighter in my chest. Something wants me to listen, and part of me wants to know why. I never planned on buying that mask. I was just browsing through an antiques fair on a weekend when my eyes locked onto its red and black patterns. I felt a jolt run through my body the second I saw it. I shrugged off the feeling at first. I assumed it was just surprise at the bold colors and the strange carvings. I didn't think much about it until I was already reaching for my wallet. I had no real reason to buy something like that, but I did. The vendor handed it to me with a grin that made me uneasy. The deal was done in under a minute. I walked away from that booth with the mask in my hands, feeling a tingle at the back of my neck. That was my first mistake. When I got home, I decided to hang the mask in my living room. I don't know why I picked that spot. It's right across from the couch, so it's impossible to ignore. I remember the first time I put it up. I held it against the wall, hammered a small nail, and hooked it there. It seemed to stare at me the moment it was in place. I stood back, took a breath, and felt a strange tightness in my chest. The mask wasn't large, but its colors stood out against the beige wall. The red looked wet under the soft light of the room lamp, and the black stripes had a dull shine, like old tar. I tried to dismiss the weird tension in my shoulders. I thought maybe I was just tired or stressed. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and tried to relax. Then I walked back to the living room and almost dropped my glass. I swear the mask looked different. The red lines seemed a little wider, and the black seemed more intense. It looked like it had shifted, but the nail was in the same place. The mask was at the same angle. I shook my head, told myself I was imagining things, and set my glass on the coffee table. That night I sat in front of the TV trying to watch a late-night show. My focus kept drifting to the mask on the wall. Every time I glanced at it, I had the impression the paint had moved. I leaned forward on the couch to get a closer look. I couldn't pinpoint any exact change, but the design seemed to pulse. I remember rubbing my eyes and feeling my heart thud in my chest. My palms got sweaty. My throat felt dry. I tried to laugh it off. I switched channels, tried to ignore it, but it felt like the mask was blinking at me. Eventually, I turned off the TV and went to bed. I woke up around 3 in the morning, thirsty. I got up, headed down the hallway, and reached the living room. The lamp was off, but some streetlight filtered in through the blinds. My eyes adjusted to the dim glow, and I saw the mask hanging there. My breath caught in my throat. My heart started racing. I thought I saw its eyes move. The surface of the mask is carved with slits that look like eyes, but I felt certain they followed me as I moved. I stopped in the middle of the room, my hand trembling as I ran my palm over my face. A cold sweat ran down my back. I wanted to deny it, but I could swear the mask was tracking me. I didn't sleep well after that. When my alarm rang in the morning, I felt heavy. My neck hurt. I pushed through my day, trying not to think about the mask, but it stayed in my mind like a thorn. By the time I got home from work, I was exhausted. I walked into the living room and my eyes went straight to the mask. The red paint looked darker than before, almost maroon. The black lines had a dull shine, like wet charcoal. The shape of the mask appeared tighter, like it was clenching. It was unsettling. I placed my coat on the chair, stood there for a moment, and felt a wave of nausea. It was like the room was too small, and the mask was taking up all the space. I started noticing other things as the days passed. Sometimes, when I looked away from it for a moment and looked back, I'd see a small drip of red paint that wasn't there before, or I'd catch the faint impression of a curve in the black that seemed new. It felt like the mask was rewriting itself each time I turned my eyes away. On some evenings, if I sat there in silence, I'd pick up a soft rustling sound. It reminded me of someone shifting in a chair, trying to get comfortable. I'd scan the room for the source. I'd check the windows, the vents, the furniture. My chest would tighten when I realized the sound was coming from the mask's direction. After a week of this, I started waking up more often in the middle of the night. Each time I'd walk into the living room and stare at the mask for a few seconds. My legs would feel weak, and I'd have to breathe slowly to keep myself steady. The mask's eyes would seem wider, as if the slits had grown. I felt like I couldn't escape its gaze. I'd walk into the kitchen for water, and I'd sense the mask behind me like it was leaning forward. I'd feel lightheaded, and sometimes my vision would blur. By the time I returned to bed, I'd be sweating. It wasn't just at night, though. One Saturday morning, I decided to dust the living room. I figured maybe I was letting my imagination run wild, and a bit of cleaning might calm my nerves. When I got near the mask with a soft cloth, I stopped. I noticed a faint smell like old iron. It was metallic and sour. I held the cloth close to the mask, but I hesitated to touch it. The smell made me feel like I had swallowed something bitter. My stomach tightened, and I felt a sudden headache. I moved the cloth closer and brushed the edge of the mask. For a second, I swore the mask's surface was warm, like living skin. I dropped the cloth and backed away, nearly tripping over the coffee table. That same day, I considered taking the mask off the wall and throwing it out. My hands shook when I reached for it. My fingers touched the edges, and I felt a vibration. It wasn't strong, but it was enough to make my arms tense. I let go immediately and took a few quick steps back. My heart pounded so hard that I could barely catch my breath. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, trying to steady myself. Then I marched out of the living room, closing the door behind me. I felt like a coward, but I had no idea what else to do. At that point, I started sleeping with the bedroom door shut. I also kept a small light on in the hallway. I didn't like the dark, and I didn't like the feeling that the mask was just a few steps away. Some nights I thought I heard a soft tapping from the living room. Other times I heard nothing and just stared at the ceiling for hours. My dreams were uneasy and left me feeling drained in the morning. I had a permanent tension in my shoulders. My appetite got worse and I had trouble focusing at work. One night I had the urge to check something in the mirror. I had been washing my hands in the bathroom when a sudden thought struck me. Is there something on my face? I don't know why I thought that. I leaned forward toward the mirror and looked at myself. My face seemed pale. My eyes were bloodshot. Then I felt my chest tighten because for a second, I thought I saw a different face in the mirror. It had white eyes, painted skin, and red and black stripes. The vision lasted less than a second, but it was enough to make me stagger back. My hand slipped on the sink's edge and I nearly fell. I tried to shake it off as a trick of the light, but the pounding in my head wouldn't go away. After that moment, I started catching glimpses of that painted face in any reflective surface. A window at night, the TV screen when it was turned off, even the glossy finish on the kitchen backsplash. Each time I felt my stomach lurch. I'd see those white eyes and the red and black markings, then I'd blink and see my own reflection. It was always so fast, but it left my heart thumping. Another time, I was standing in the living room, facing the mask. I had turned on every light in the house because I didn't want any dark corners. I noticed something glinting near the mask. It looked like droplets of wet paint. I took a step closer. The liquid was thick and dark red, almost brown. I reached out a finger, then stopped. My body went cold, and I felt a wave of nausea. I grabbed an old rag from the kitchen and tried to wipe the droplets away. They smeared across the wall, leaving faint stains. My ears started ringing. I dropped the rag and pressed my palms to my temples. I had this sudden thought that I needed to do something. I couldn't just leave it like this. I felt like the mask was demanding something, like it wanted me to perform a ritual. Over the next few days, that idea got stronger. It wasn't a clear message or anything spoken. It was a nagging sense in the back of my head that I had to satisfy the mask. It felt like it was calling for something specific, some act that would please it. I had no clue what that could be. I found myself pacing around the living room, staring at it, waiting for some sign. My chest felt tight, and I bit my nails until they bled. My nights were restless, and my days were filled with tension. One evening, I tried to approach the mask again. I put on rubber gloves, hoping that would block out any weird sensation. My goal was to take it down and lock it away in a closet or something. I inched closer, and the air in the room felt heavier. I heard a humming in my ears. My legs shook and my mouth went dry. I reached for the mask, touching the sides. This time, I felt that slight vibration again, like a low pulse. My vision blurred, and my head spun. I had to pull my hands back and grip the edge of the mantelpiece to keep my balance. I kept my eyes on the mask as I leaned forward, trying not to lose my footing. My breath came in ragged bursts. I felt panic rising in my chest. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced with thoughts of smashing it or burning it, but I was scared. I worried about what might happen if I damaged it. The mask seemed to cling to the wall, pulsing with its own energy. I stumbled out of the room, slammed the door, and sat on the floor in the hallway. My hands shook. My shirt was soaked in sweat and my heart hammered in my chest. That night, I considered staying at a friend's place or checking into a motel, but I felt this pull that wouldn't let me leave. I kept thinking about what might happen if I left the mask alone in my house. Maybe it would ruin the walls. Maybe it would move around on its own. My mind was a mess. I tried to calm myself by pacing, drinking water, and trying to watch some mindless show. None of it helped. I kept glancing at the living room door, half expecting to see the mask slip out somehow. Finally, I sat on my couch, facing the closed living room door. I felt my body sag with exhaustion. My hands were cramped from clenching them so hard. My throat hurt from breathing shallowly. I realized I needed to confront it. The mask wanted a ritual, but I had no idea what that meant. I had this growing fear that if I didn't figure it out, the mask would keep haunting me until I gave in. But the idea of actually doing anything it wanted filled me with dread. My stomach churned every time I imagined kneeling in front of it or chanting something strange. I had no instructions, no guidance, just a feeling. The next morning, I woke up after a rough sleep and stood outside the living room door. My hand hovered over the knob. I counted to 5, twisted the knob, and stepped inside. The mask was where I left it, but it looked more intense. The red lines seemed to glisten. The black stripes looked sharper. I swallowed the lump in my throat and walked straight up to it. My legs trembled with each step. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I got close enough to see the tiny cracks in the paint. I could see the rough texture of the wood beneath. My breathing was shallow. My hands were cold. I spoke out loud, asking it what it wanted. My voice shook, and my words sounded stupid even to me. Of course, there was no direct response, but my mind felt heavy, like something was pushing against my thoughts. I asked again, my voice cracking. A jolt of panic spread through me. I felt dizzy, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My gut told me that I was about to do something irreversible, but I had no clue what. The mask stared back with those slits, and I thought I saw a faint twitch near the corners. My scalp prickled, and my knees threatened to buckle. I'm still in that moment now, trying to decide what to do next. The mask is on the wall behind me as I write this. I can feel its presence, like a weight on my back. My mouth feels dry. My fingers feel numb. I keep glancing over my shoulder, expecting it to change position or move. It hasn't yet, but I feel like it could at any second. The walls of this apartment feel tight, and the air feels stale. I don't know what the mask wants, and I'm scared to find out. My only plan is to stay in control of myself and not let it push me into something I'll regret. But every night, I sense its gaze on me, demanding something more. I can't deny that it feels alive, and I can't deny that it's fixated on me. I wish I had left it at that antiques fair, but I didn't, and now I'm stuck with it. I'm writing this to keep myself calm, but the tension won't go away. I have no idea how this will end. For now, all I can do is stare at the mask and wait. I was halfway through my Sunday when the first letter showed up. It was in an old envelope with no stamp. My name was on the front, written in shaky pencil marks that looked like they were done under a dim light. I felt a chill before I even opened it. There was a dusty smell clinging to the paper like it had been stored in a forgotten box. Inside there was just one word, repeated over and over in erratic handwriting. Come. I didn't know what it meant. I set the letter on my kitchen counter. My heart felt tight, but I tried to shrug it off. It could have been a prank or some weird marketing stunt. It didn't mention a location, a time, or anything else. It just said, come. I tried not to think about it. I went to work the next day, pretending everything was normal. But then I got home and found another letter slipped under my front door. Same style, same dusty smell, same single word. Come. It made my stomach tense. I looked around my hallway. Nobody was there. No footprints. No sign of who delivered it. I locked my door and stood there for a while, staring at the envelope in my hand. My palms got damp. I didn't like how my mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Still, I tossed the letter in a drawer and tried to distract myself with dinner. The next morning, I found a third letter stuck in my mailbox. Again, no postage, no return address. Just, come. This time the letters were bigger, like someone was more desperate to get my attention. I felt my chest tighten. I went inside and checked my phone for calls or messages from unknown numbers. Nothing. I sat on my couch, flipping through channels, but I couldn't focus. I kept looking at my front door, expecting more letters to appear out of nowhere. By the end of the week, I'd received 5 letters. They all looked the same. Old envelopes, faded paper, that dusty smell, and the single word, come. I started double-checking my windows and doors every night. It felt like someone was watching me. My skin would prickle whenever I heard any noise outside, like a branch tapping against the window or a car passing by. I jumped at small sounds. I wasn't sleeping well. I'd wake up sweating at odd hours, thinking I heard rustling near my door. But every time I checked, it was silent. On the 6th day, I felt drawn to do something about it. I don't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. The letters didn't have a place or a time, but somehow I got this idea in my head that I needed to go to the old train station on the outskirts of town. I had no memory of that station. I'd never been there, but I knew it was decommissioned decades ago. I'd driven past it once, noticing the boarded-up windows and the signs warning people to stay out. But that morning I woke up with a clear sense that the letters were urging me there. I had a shaky feeling in my gut, but I also felt like ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. So I drove out of town and headed for the train station. I parked near a rusted fence. It was around noon, but the sky looked dull. There was an overcast that made everything feel lifeless. I got out of my car, feeling an uneasy tingle in my neck. The station building was gray and covered in graffiti. Broken windows dotted the upper floors. Loose boards creaked as the wind blew. I stepped over some debris, moving around the side of the building, looking for a way in or a clue about who was sending me those letters. I found a gap in the fence and slipped through. On the other side, there was an old loading area with cracked concrete and puddles of stagnant water. A strange smell hung in the air, like mold mixed with old oil. My heart thumped. I walked carefully, avoiding broken glass. I noticed a large cargo door was slightly open. There was a faint light coming from inside, like a weak fluorescent bulb or a small flashlight. I peeked in, expecting to see someone, but nobody was there. I stepped inside and saw a single rocking chair in the center of the floor. It was pointed at me under a flickering overhead light. The space was mostly empty. Some rusted machinery stood against the wall, and there were a few crates stacked in a corner. Dust swirled around. I heard the rocking chair squeak. At first, I thought someone was sitting there, but it was empty. The chair moved a little, like it had just been pushed. My chest went tight. I felt sweat prickling my forehead. I looked around, waiting for a person to step out of the shadows. Nothing happened. I stood there for a minute, unsure of what to do next. The squeak of the rocking chair made the hairs on my arms stand up. I felt the urge to say something, but no words came. Eventually, I walked closer to the chair. It was old, made of worn wood with chipped paint around the arms. The seat was dusty, and I saw faint scuff marks on the floor, like it had been moved back and forth. I didn't see any letters there, no notes, no hints. After a while, I decided this was pointless. I walked out of the cargo area, trying to control my breathing. I made my way around the station, checking if there was anything else that looked suspicious. Nothing stood out. I felt disappointed and a bit foolish. I had driven all the way out here hoping for answers and found nothing but an abandoned rocking chair under a flickering light. I went back to my car, looking over my shoulder every few steps. My skin felt cold and clammy. I drove home telling myself I needed to forget about the letters, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had just scratched the surface of something I didn't understand. Over the next few days, more letters arrived under my door. They were different now. They mentioned us and our memories, but they still didn't tell me who was sending them or why. The envelopes looked older, more brittle. The handwriting was more frantic, like the writer was desperate. The smell was the same musty odor I had noticed before. I tried to throw them away, but I kept retrieving them from the trash, hoping to see a detail I might have missed. Late one night, I heard a soft thud at my door. My heart pounded. I got up from the couch and opened the door fast, expecting to catch the delivery person. But no one was there. I looked down and saw another envelope. My hands trembled. I tore it open in the hallway. The note inside said, "We are waiting." It was the same shaky script as before. I felt a knot in my throat. I wanted to yell into the empty hallway, demand that whoever was doing this show themselves. But I just stood there, my ears ringing. I went back inside and locked the door. My apartment felt smaller. My eyes darted around, checking corners and windows. I stuffed the letter in a drawer, then climbed into bed. I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the building. Eventually, I dozed off, but I had anxious dreams. I kept seeing that rocking chair under the flickering light. The next day, I called in sick to work. I didn't want to go anywhere or talk to anyone. I felt paranoid. I kept checking the hallway through the peephole. Around noon, I realized I couldn't just stay locked up. I needed to do something. Part of me thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I had a bunch of creepy letters telling me to come, plus a weird feeling about an abandoned station. There wasn't any direct threat. Nobody had broken in or physically harmed me. It sounded like something they'd dismiss as a prank. I grabbed my jacket and left the apartment. I needed to get some fresh air, maybe clear my head. I walked around my neighborhood looking at people's faces, wondering if one of them was my anonymous messenger. I couldn't relax. My gut twisted whenever I saw someone glance at me. It could have been an innocent look, but I read everything as suspicious. That evening, I returned home and found a new envelope. This time, the letters inside referred to the place where we meet. It instructed me to go back to the old station's loading area, adding a specific time, midnight. That was the first time I saw an actual time mentioned. My pulse pounded. I thought about ignoring it, but a strong pull inside me wouldn't let me. I needed to see who was behind all this. I felt more scared than ever, but I couldn't stand the idea of letting this keep happening without any resolution. I spent the rest of the night pacing around my apartment, trying to decide whether to call someone for backup. I ended up leaving my phone on the kitchen counter, feeling that if I involved others, it might escalate or spook whoever was luring me. I don't know if that was logical. I felt tense, my muscles taut, my jaw clenching every time I thought about that rocking chair. Around 11:30, I grabbed a flashlight and drove back to the station. The roads were mostly empty. My heart thudded with every passing streetlight. When I arrived, I parked at the same spot near the fence. The place was dark, except for a thin moonlight. Clouds drifted overhead, making shadows move. I walked through the gap in the fence. The ground felt uneven under my feet. My flashlight revealed the same puddles and broken glass. The air smelled stale. I heard my own breath echoing in my ears. I pushed open the cargo door. The flickering light above the rocking chair was still on, but it seemed dimmer. The chair was in the same spot, facing the entrance. It moved slowly, like someone had just left it. I stood there, my body stiff. I looked around for any sign of another person. My flashlight beam jumped across the walls and crates. It felt like I was inside a giant empty shell. The silence pressed in on me. Then I saw a pile of envelopes on the floor next to the chair. They were all addressed to me. My name was scrawled on each one. My chest tightened. I moved closer and picked one up. It had the same dusty smell. The note inside said, "We remember." My mouth went dry. I checked another envelope. It said, "We are connected." I felt a rush of cold sweat roll down my back. I shined the flashlight around the room again. I expected someone to step out from behind a crate or appear in the doorway. But nothing happened. I noticed the hair on my arms standing on end. My breathing got shallow. I opened a few more envelopes, each with similar messages about memories, connections, waiting. I felt confused and uneasy. I kept looking for a clue about who "we" was. I stood there for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. The rocking chair creaked on its own again. My throat felt constricted. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice echoed in the empty space. Nobody answered. I took a step back, my hands shaking. I wanted to leave, but part of me wanted to figure it out. I waited, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was some old acquaintance trying to mess with me. Maybe it was a stranger who picked me at random. I had no clear explanation. Finally, I turned to leave. I couldn't stand the feeling that the room itself was closing in on me. As I walked away, I heard one last creak from the rocking chair. I didn't look back. I hurried out and pushed the cargo door closed behind me. Outside, the night air felt fresh but cold. I walked to my car, checking over my shoulder. I kept expecting footsteps behind me, but I only heard my own heartbeat. I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. When I got back to my apartment, there was another envelope under the door. I almost didn't want to pick it up, but I couldn't ignore it. I opened it with shaky hands. It said, "This isn't over." I felt my stomach drop. I stood there listening to the quiet hallway. My skin tingled from head to toe. That's where I am now, feeling stuck in a loop. I keep getting these letters telling me to go back to that place, promising some kind of shared memory or meeting, but never giving me a real explanation. My nerves are shot. I don't know who's behind it or why they chose me. I'm worried about losing my mind, but I can't force myself to walk away from it completely. I know that as long as those letters keep coming, I'm going to feel that weird pull, like I'm being summoned. And I don't know where it leads, or what might be waiting for me the next time I go back. I'm alone with this, and the tension keeps building. I don't see a way to stop it. I keep wondering if I should give in or fight it. But I can't ignore one fact. The more I try to turn away, the stronger the urge becomes. And it's starting to feel like I can't escape.